great hall of Blackmore Ridge shook with the sound of drums, and Elena Marsh dropped a silver tray the moment the doors slammed shut behind her. She had only come inside to deliver a jug of water to the kitchen master, yet somehow, she was standing in the middle of the selection line, surrounded by noble daughters dressed in silk and jewels. Every eye in the room turned toward her plain gray dress and the flower still dusting her sleeves. Someone at the back of the hall let out a sharp laugh, and within seconds the whole chamber was buzzing with whispers. Elena wanted to run, but the guards at the door had already crossed their spears, sealing her inside with nowhere to go. At the front of the hall, seated on a throne carved from black stone, sat Alpha King Damon Cross. He was young for a king, only 26 years old, yet his presence filled the room the way thunder fills the sky before a storm. His eyes were the color of a winter lake, pale and sharp, and when they landed on Elena, something in his chest tightened so suddenly that he nearly rose from his seat. He had spent the entire morning greeting duchesses and ladies with practiced patience, feeling nothing but the dull weight of duty. But the moment his gaze found the girl in the plain dress, his wolf let out a growl deep inside him, a sound so loud in his own mind that he almost thought the whole hall could hear it. Lady Seraphina Vale, standing 3 places ahead of Elena, straightened her golden gown and smiled toward the throne, certain that today would be the day she became queen. Her family had prepared for this moment for years, spending fortunes on tutors, dresses, and perfumes imported from the southern coast. She had been told by 3 different fortune readers that the crown would be hers. She did not so much as glance behind her at the maid who had accidentally wandered into the line, assuming the girl would be dragged out within moments by embarrassed guards. But the guards did not move. King Damon lifted one hand, and the entire hall fell into a silence so complete that Elena could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. He rose from his throne slowly, descending the marble steps one at a time, his long black coat trailing behind him like a shadow-given form. Every noble in the room assumed he was walking toward Seraphina, the obvious choice, the daughter of the wealthiest duke in the kingdom. Seraphina's smile widened, and she tilted her chin upward, ready to receive him. Instead, Damon walked past her without so much as a glance. He stopped directly in front of Elena Marsh. For a moment, nobody in the hall understood what they were seeing. A murmur rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Elena's hands trembled at her sides, and she lowered her eyes, certain that the king was about to order her removed for the disrespect of standing where she did not belong. Instead, Damon reached out and gently lifted her chin with 2 fingers, tilting her face upward so their eyes met. The moment their eyes locked, laughter broke out across the hall. It started as a chuckle from one of the younger lords near the back, spread to a group of ladies covering their mouths with jeweled fans, and within seconds, the entire chamber was filled with open mockery. Someone shouted, "He has chosen the maid." "Our king has chosen a servant girl," another voice called out. "Perhaps he lost a bet with someone." The laughter grew louder, echoing off the stone walls, and Elena felt her face burn with a shame so deep she wished the floor would open and swallow her whole. Damon did not laugh. He did not even smile. His jaw tightened, and a low sound rumbled from his chest, quiet, but unmistakably a warning. The laughter began to falter as nobles noticed the expression on his face, a look none of them had ever seen directed at their own kind, a look reserved only for enemies on a battlefield. "Silence," Damon said, and though his voice was not raised, it carried through the hall like a blade cutting through fog. The laughter died instantly, replaced by an uneasy stillness. Even the guards along the walls straightened their backs. Elena, still trembling, finally found the courage to speak. "Your Majesty, there has been a terrible mistake. I am only a kitchen maid. I was bringing water inside when the doors closed. I never meant to stand among the ladies of the court. Please, forgive my error, and allow me to return to my duties." Damon studied her face for a long moment, taking in the smudge of flour on her cheek, the simple braid of her brown hair, the honest fear in her brown eyes, so different from the practiced elegance of every other woman in the room. He had met countless noble daughters that morning, each one performing grace and charm like actors on a stage, yet not one of them had made his wolf stir even slightly. This girl, who wanted nothing more than to disappear, had done more to him in 10 seconds than any of them had managed in an entire ceremony. "There is no mistake," Damon said finally, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent hall. "I choose her." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of shock through the crowd. Serafina's smile vanished entirely, replaced by a look of pure disbelief, then fury barely contained beneath a polite mask. Her father, Duke Vale, stepped forward with his hand raised as if to object, then thought better of it when he saw the expression on the king's face. "Your Majesty," an elderly councilman said carefully, stepping forward from the side of the hall. "Perhaps you are simply overwhelmed by the ceremony. This girl is a servant. She has no title, no lands, no family of noble blood. Surely you understand the consequences of such a choice." "I understand perfectly," Damon replied, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. "I am not choosing a title. I am not choosing lands. I am choosing her." Elena felt the room spinning around her. This could not be real. Kings did not choose maids. Kings chose princesses, duchesses, women trained since birth, for exactly this moment. She had grown up cleaning floors and washing linens in the castle since she was 12 years old, ever since her mother died and left her with nothing but a small wooden box of old letters and no family to speak of. She had never imagined herself standing anywhere near a throne, let alone being chosen by the man who sat upon it. "Your Majesty," Elena whispered, so quietly that only he could hear her. "Please, do not do this. They already hate me. If you choose me, you will only make things worse for everyone, including yourself. Choose someone else. Choose Lady Serafina. She has waited for this her entire life." For the first time since he had stopped in front of her, something softened in Damon's expression. He leaned down slightly, so that his words reached only her ears. "I have chosen countless times in my life to do what is expected of me. I have never once chosen what I actually wanted. Today, for the first time, I am choosing what feels right, and it is you. I will not change my mind because a room full of strangers finds it amusing." Elena did not know how to respond. No one had ever spoken to her with such certainty, such quiet conviction, especially not a man with the power to command an entire kingdom. She searched his pale eyes for any sign of mockery, any hint that this was some cruel trick devised by bored nobles to humiliate a servant girl in front of the entire court. She found none, only steady, unwavering resolve. Behind them, the whispers continued, quieter now but no less venomous. Serafina stood frozen at the front of the line, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her face pale beneath her careful makeup. She had spent years imagining this exact moment, and now she was watching it slip away, given instead to a girl who scrubbed pots in the castle kitchens. The humiliation burned through her like fire, and in that moment, something cold and calculating settled behind her eyes. Duke Vale placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, leaning close to murmur something only she could hear. Whatever he said made her lips curl into a thin, dangerous smile, though she quickly smoothed her expression back into practiced calm, before anyone else noticed. King Damon turned toward the assembled court, raising his voice so that every person in the hall could hear him clearly. "Let it be known that Elena Marsh is chosen as my intended mate. She will be given quarters in the royal wing, proper attendance, and all the respect due to her new position. Anyone who treats her with disrespect answers directly to me." A heavy silence followed his words. No one dared laugh again, though Elena could still feel the weight of 100 disbelieving stares pressing against her skin. She glanced down at her plain gray dress, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked, standing beside a king dressed in black silk and silver, and she wondered how she was possibly going to survive whatever came next. As the guards escorted the nobles out of the hall, whispering among themselves the entire way, Damon remained standing beside Elena, seemingly unbothered by the chaos his announcement had caused. Elena finally found her voice again, once most of the hall had emptied. "Your Majesty, may I ask you something?" "You may ask me anything," Damon said. "Why me? I am truly nobody. I have no family name, no dowry, nothing to offer a king. There must be a reason, and I would rather know the truth now than be surprised by it later." Damon considered her question carefully before answering. "I wish I could give you a simple answer. All I can tell you is that the moment I saw you, something inside me recognized you, though I cannot explain how or why. My wolf has never reacted to anyone the way it reacted to you. In our kind, that reaction means something important, something ancient. I do not fully understand it myself yet, but I intend to find out." Elena did not fully understand what he meant by his wolf, though she had grown up hearing stories about the shifting bloodlines that ruled the kingdom. families who could transform into great wolves under the light of the full moon. She had always assumed such stories were exaggerated legends, colorful tales told to children at bedtime. Standing this close to the king, feeling the strange energy radiating from him, she was no longer so certain. "There is something else," Damon continued, his voice dropping lower. "When I looked at you, I noticed a mark on your shoulder, just visible above the collar of your dress. Have you always had it?" Elena's hand rose instinctively to her shoulder, touching the faint crescent-shaped birthmark that had been there since she was born. Her mother used to trace it with her finger when Elena was small, telling her it was a mark of luck, though she had never explained further before she passed away. "Yes," Elena said slowly. "My mother said it was a birthmark, nothing more. Why do you ask?" Something flickered across Damon's face, a mixture of curiosity and something deeper, something almost like recognition. "It may be nothing," he said carefully. "Or it may be everything. Either way, I intend to make certain you are protected while we discover the truth together." Before Elena could ask another question, a castle attendant approached, bowing low before the king. "Your Majesty, the royal quarters have been prepared as you instructed. Shall I escort the young lady there now?" Damon nodded, though his eyes lingered on Elena a moment longer, as if reluctant to let her out of his sight so soon. "Take good care of her," he said. "She is under my direct protection, and I will visit her personally once the evening council concludes." As the attendant led Elena from the hall, she glanced back once toward the throne, finding Damon still watching her with an expression she could not quite name. Behind her, hidden in the shadows of a side corridor, Serafina watched the two of them with narrowed eyes, already turning over plans in her mind, plans that would ensure the maid did not remain in the castle for very long. Elena walked through unfamiliar corridors, lined with tapestries and portraits of past kings, feeling more lost with every step than she had felt in her entire life. Just an hour ago, she had been carrying water jugs through the kitchen, worrying about nothing more complicated than whether the bread would rise properly for the evening meal. Now she was being led toward rooms fit for royalty, chosen by a king whose eyes seemed to hold both warmth and mystery in equal measure, and marked by something on her own skin that apparently meant more than she had ever imagined. Whatever waited for her beyond those golden doors, Elena understood one thing with absolute certainty. Her life, quiet and simple until this very morning, had changed forever, and there was no going back to the way things used to be. The royal quarters were unlike anything Elena had ever seen. The room had tall windows overlooking the eastern gardens, a bed draped in deep blue silk, and a wardrobe carved from dark wood that stood taller than she did. Two attendants, a young woman named Grace and an older woman named Margaret, waited inside to help her settle in. Elena stood frozen at the doorway, unable to convince her feet to step onto the polished floor, as if she did not belong inside such a room, as if the moment she entered, she might break something simply by breathing wrong. "Come in, miss," Grace said gently, sensing her hesitation. "These rooms are yours now. There is nothing to fear here." Elena stepped inside slowly, running her fingers along the edge of a carved wooden table, still half convinced this was all some elaborate dream she would wake from at any moment. Margaret began preparing a bath scented with lavender, while Grace laid out a simple green dress, far finer than anything Elena had ever owned. Neither woman treated her with the scorn Elena expected. If anything, they seemed genuinely curious about her, occasionally sneaking glances, as though trying to understand what had made the king choose her above every noble daughter in the kingdom. "May I ask you something?" Elena said quietly, as Margaret helped unfasten the back of her old gray dress. "Of course," Margaret replied. "Do you think the king made a mistake? Choosing me, I mean. I keep waiting for someone to tell me this was all some misunderstanding." Margaret paused, considering her words carefully. "I have served in this castle for nearly 30 years, miss. I have seen many selections, many ceremonies, many nobles paraded before the throne dressed in silk and jewels. I have never once seen the king's eyes hold the expression they held today. Whatever this is, I do not believe it is a mistake." Grace nodded in agreement, though she added with a small smile, "That does not mean it will be easy. The nobles will not accept you quickly. You should prepare yourself for that." Elena appreciated the honesty more than she could express. As the two women helped her bathe and dress, she found herself relaxing slightly, though the weight of everything that had happened still pressed heavily on her chest. When she finally looked at herself in the tall mirror standing in the corner of the room, She barely recognized the reflection staring back. The green dress fit her perfectly, bringing out the warm brown of her eyes, and her hair had been brushed until it shone, pulled back into a simple but elegant style. She looked, for the first time in her life, like she might actually belong somewhere important. That evening, after the council meeting concluded, Damon arrived at her door exactly as he had promised. He knocked softly, rather than simply entering, a small gesture that surprised Elena given his position. When she opened the door, he stood there in a simpler black tunic, looking less like a king and more like an ordinary man, though the intensity in his pale eyes remained unchanged. "May I come in?" he asked. "Of course, Your Majesty." "Damon," he corrected gently. "When we are alone, please call me Damon." Elena nodded, though the familiarity still felt strange on her tongue. She stepped aside to let him enter, and he walked to the window, looking out over the darkening gardens for a long moment before speaking again. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "I should have prepared you before making such an announcement in front of the entire court. I acted on instinct rather than thinking of how it would affect you." "You do not need to apologize," Elena said. "Though I admit, I still do not understand why any of this happened. Kings do not choose maids. There must be families in this kingdom who will see this as an insult." "There will be some who feel that way," Damon admitted. "But my choice was not made lightly, even if it appeared sudden. Among our kind, the bond between mates is something we cannot simply choose or ignore. It exists whether we want it to or not. What I felt when I saw you today was not confusion or mistake. It was recognition, as certain and undeniable as recognizing my own reflection." Elena sat down slowly on a cushioned chair near the window, processing his words. "I was raised believing the old stories about shifting bloodlines and fated mates were simply that. Stories. My mother never spoke much about such things, though she did once tell me my father's family came from the Northern Territories, a place I never visited and know almost nothing about." Something in Damon's expression sharpened at her words. "Your father's family was from the north?" "That is what my mother told me, though she rarely spoke of him. He died before I was born, or so she claimed. She raised me alone in a small village, near the southern border, before we moved here when I was 10 years old. She passed away 2 years later, and I have worked in this castle ever since." Damon was quiet for a long moment, clearly turning something over in his mind. "I would like to have some inquiries made about your family history, if you are willing. Not to intrude upon your privacy, but because the mark on your shoulder, combined with what you have just told me, raises questions I believe deserve answers." "What kind of questions?" Elena asked, a small knot of worry forming in her stomach. "I cannot say for certain yet," Damon replied honestly. "There are old legends among our people, about a bloodline nearly lost generations ago, families connected to the moon, in ways beyond ordinary shifters. I do not wish to fill your head with speculation, before I have real answers. But I promise you this, whatever we discover, I will not let it change how I feel about you." Elena appreciated his honesty, even as uncertainty coiled tighter in her chest. Before she could ask further questions, a soft knock sounded at the door, and Grace entered to inform them that dinner had been prepared in the private dining hall reserved for the royal family. Dinner that evening was quieter than Elena expected, free from the judgmental stares of the court, just the two of them seated at a long table that felt almost too large for only 2 people. Damon asked her questions about her life, her childhood, the small village where she grew up, and Elena found herself relaxing more with each passing minute, surprised by how easily conversation flowed between them, despite everything that separated their 2 worlds. "You truly enjoy cooking?" Damon asked, noticing how her expression brightened when she described helping in the castle kitchens. "I do," Elena admitted. "There is something satisfying about taking simple ingredients and turning them into something people enjoy. I know it is not a noble pursuit, but it brings me peace." "I find that admirable," Damon said sincerely. "Most nobles I have met find satisfaction only in things they can display or boast about. You find satisfaction in the work itself. That is a rare quality." Elena felt her cheeks warm at his words, unused to receiving genuine compliments from anyone, let alone a king. As dinner continued, she noticed the careful way he watched her, not with the calculating gaze of someone assessing a political arrangement, but with something gentler, something that made her stomach flutter in a way she did not fully understand. Meanwhile, in a different wing of the castle, Lady Serafina paced back and forth across her chamber, her golden gown discarded on the floor, replaced by a simpler robe, as she vented her frustration to her closest companion, a young noblewoman named Isabel. "He humiliated me in front of the entire court," Serafina hissed, gripping the edge of her vanity table so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Chosen instead by a servant, a nobody who scrubs floors for a living. I will not allow this to stand." "What will you do?" Isabel asked cautiously. "I do not know yet," Serafina admitted, "but I refuse to accept defeat so easily. There must be some way to expose her unworthiness, some flaw the king has overlooked in his moment of foolish infatuation. Every servant has secrets. I intend to find hers." Isabel hesitated before speaking again. "Your father mentioned something to you earlier, did he not? I saw him whisper to you as we left the hall." Serafina's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "My father has connections throughout the kingdom, people who owe him favors, people who can dig into histories long buried. He believes there is more to this maid than meets the eye, and he intends to find out exactly what that is before the king discovers it first." "Why would that matter?" Isabel asked. "Because knowledge is power," Serafina replied coldly. "If there is something hidden in her past, something the king does not yet know, we can use it to remove her before she becomes too difficult to displace. And if there is nothing hidden at all, we will simply have to create something convincing enough to serve the same purpose." Isabel shifted uncomfortably at the implication behind her friend's words, but said nothing further, understanding that once Serafina set her mind toward a goal, very little could dissuade her from pursuing it, regardless of the cost to anyone standing in her way. Back in the private dining hall, unaware of the plotting taking shape elsewhere in the castle, Elena and Damon continued their quiet dinner, the conversation gradually shifting toward lighter topics, small stories from childhood, favorite foods, memories that made them both laugh despite the strange circumstances that had brought them together. For the first time since the chaos of the selection ceremony, Elena felt something resembling comfort settle over her, a fragile sense that perhaps, impossible as it seemed, she might actually find a place for herself within these unfamiliar walls. As the evening wound down and Damon finally rose to leave, he paused at the door, turning back to face her one final time. "Whatever happens in the coming days, whatever the court says or does, I want you to remember that my choice was not a mistake, and it is not one I intend to reverse. You are safe here, Elena, for as long as you wish to stay." Elena watched him leave, the door closing softly behind him, and sat alone in the quiet dining hall for several long minutes, turning his words over in her mind. She did not yet understand the mystery surrounding her birthmark, her father's forgotten family, or the strange reaction his wolf had toward her presence. But something deep inside her, quiet and persistent, told her that whatever answers awaited her, her life would never again return to the simple routine of scrubbing floors and carrying water jugs through castle corridors. Something far larger than she could yet imagine was beginning to unfold, and she was standing directly at its center, whether she felt ready for it or not. 3 days after the selection ceremony, Elena walked through the castle gardens with Grace at her side, trying to grow accustomed to a life that still felt entirely foreign. Nobles passed them along the stone paths, some offering stiff, forced greetings, others turning their heads away entirely, as though pretending not to notice her existence would somehow undo the king's announcement. Elena kept her chin lifted despite the discomfort twisting inside her stomach, remembering Damon's words that she belonged here now, whether the court accepted it or not. "Pay them no mind," Grace whispered, as 2 young noblewomen whispered behind their fans while passing by. "Give it time. People fear what they do not understand, and right now, they do not understand you." "I do not think time will change how they feel," Elena replied honestly. "I have heard the way they speak, calling me the kitchen girl, the servant who tricked the king. They believe I schemed my way into this position." "Let them believe whatever foolish things they wish," Grace said firmly. "The king does not care what they think, and eventually, neither should you." Elena appreciated Grace's loyalty, though the sting of rejection still lingered every time she walked through the halls. As they turned a corner near the rose garden, they nearly collided with Lady Serafina, who stood waiting with an expression of practiced sweetness that did not quite reach her eyes. "Elena," Serafina said smoothly, her voice dripping with false warmth, "how wonderful to see you settling into your new quarters. I do hope the transition has not been too overwhelming for someone unaccustomed to such surroundings." "It has been an adjustment," Elena replied carefully. sensing the underlying edge beneath the polite words. Though everyone has been kind enough to help me settle in. How fortunate, Serafina continued, stepping closer. You know, I have been thinking about you constantly since the ceremony. It is truly remarkable how the king's eye can be caught by such unexpected circumstances. Tell me, did you always dream of becoming a queen while scrubbing pots in the kitchen? Or did the idea only occur to you once you found yourself standing in that line? Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she refused to let Serafina see her flustered. I never dreamed of becoming anything beyond what I already was. I did not seek this position, my lady. It found me, entirely without my intention. How convenient that explanation must be, Serafina said, her smile tightening slightly. Well, I do hope you enjoy your time in the royal wing, however long it lasts. Positions gained through fortunate accidents have a peculiar tendency to slip away just as suddenly as they arrived. Before Elena could respond, Serafina swept past her down the garden path, her attendants following closely behind, leaving a lingering chill in the warm afternoon air. Grace placed a comforting hand on Elena's arm. Do not let her words settle inside you, Grace said quietly. She is simply bitter that the crown she expected slipped from her grasp. I fear her bitterness may prove dangerous, Elena admitted, watching Serafina's retreating figure. She did not sound like someone content to simply accept defeat gracefully. That evening, Elena sat with Damon in his private study, a room lined with tall shelves of ancient books and maps of the kingdom pinned across one entire wall. He had summoned her there after receiving a report from the elder council members, and his expression carried a seriousness Elena had not seen from him before. I spoke with the pack elders today, Damon said, closing the heavy wooden door behind them for privacy. Several of them reacted strongly upon learning of your birthmark, more strongly than I anticipated. What did they say? Elena asked, settling into a chair across from his desk. They grew quiet, almost fearful, when I described it to them, Damon explained. One elder in particular, a woman named Edith, who has served this castle for over 60 years, asked to see it herself. When she did, she went pale and refused to speak further until she had consulted certain old records kept hidden within the temple archives. Elena's stomach tightened with unease.
What kind of records?
I do not know yet, Damon admitted. Edith promised to return once she had confirmed her suspicions, though she would not tell me what those suspicions were. She seemed genuinely shaken, which is unusual for someone who has lived through nearly 7 decades of pack history without losing her composure. Before Elena could ask another question, a sharp knock interrupted them, and a castle guard entered looking flustered. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but Elder Edith has returned. She insists on speaking with you immediately, and she has brought old scrolls from the temple archive. Damon exchanged a glance with Elena before nodding to the guard. Send her in. Elder Edith entered moments later, an elderly woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, her hands trembling slightly, as she carried a bundle of aged scrolls tied with faded ribbon. Her sharp eyes moved immediately to Elena, studying her face with an intensity that made Elena shift uncomfortably in her seat. Your Majesty, Edith said, her voice steadier than her hands. I apologize for the late hour, but what I have discovered cannot wait until morning. Please, sit, Damon offered, gesturing to an empty chair. Edith remained standing instead, setting the scrolls carefully upon the desk between them. 19 years ago, during the reign of your father, there occurred an event that was quietly erased from public record. A noble family from the Northern Territories, bearing the ancient crescent mark upon their bloodline, was attacked in what was officially recorded as a territorial dispute between rival packs. I have never heard of this, Damon said, frowning. That is because your father sealed the records personally, Edith explained. The family in question was known as the Moon Hollow line, believed by many among our oldest legends to carry blood connected directly to the very first wolves, blessed by the moon itself. Their line was thought entirely extinct after that attack, wiped out entirely except for rumors that a single infant may have survived, smuggled away under circumstances no one dared document clearly, for fear of drawing the attackers back to finish what they started. Elena felt her breath catch in her throat. Why are you telling us this now? Edith turned to face her directly, her expression softening with something that looked remarkably like recognition, mixed with sorrow. Because the crescent mark upon your shoulder, child, is not an ordinary birthmark. It is the mark of the Moon Hollow bloodline, a mark I have not seen in 19 years, since the night I helped carry a crying infant away from a burning estate in the dead of winter. The room fell utterly silent. Elena's hands trembled in her lap as she struggled to process what she had just heard. You knew my family? You were there? I was young then, serving as an attendant to the temple oracle, Edith said, her voice thick with old grief. I helped smuggle you away myself, entrusting you to a woman I believed would raise you far from danger, far from anyone who might recognize what you truly were. I never learned what became of you afterward, only that the woman disappeared with you into the southern territories, and I assumed, as many did, that both of you had perished eventually, lost to time and distance. Elena thought immediately of her mother, quiet and private, who had raised her alone in a small village far from any northern territory, who had died before ever explaining the truth of their past. My mother never spoke of any of this. She told me my father died before I was born, nothing more. She protected you the only way she knew how, Edith said gently. Silence was likely the safest choice available to her, given what had happened to your true family. Whoever orchestrated that attack 19 years ago may still believe the Moon Hollow bloodline ended that winter. Revealing your survival, even accidentally, could have placed you in tremendous danger. Damon had remained silent through most of this exchange, his expression unreadable as he processed the implications of what Edith had revealed. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. If this is true, if Elena truly carries the blood of the Moon Hollow line, then my wolf's reaction to her upon our first meeting makes far more sense than mere coincidence. What do you mean? Elena asked. There are old prophecies, Damon explained carefully, passed down through generations of alpha bloodlines, speaking of a union between the ruling line and the last surviving heir of Moon Hollow blood, a union meant to restore balance to our kingdoms during a time of growing unrest between the packs. I dismiss these prophecies as old superstition, stories meant to comfort our people during difficult times. I never imagined I might actually be living inside one. Edith nodded solemnly. The Temple Oracle has long awaited confirmation of the Moon Hollow bloodline's survival. I believe, given what we have discovered tonight, it is time she examined Elena herself. Only the Oracle can confirm with certainty what I merely suspect from an old mark on skin and fragments of memory 19 years faded. Elena sat frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden weight of everything being revealed around her. Just days ago, she had been an ordinary maid with no family, no history worth mentioning, content simply to survive quietly within the castle walls. Now she was being told she carried ancient blood connected to prophecy, blood that someone had once tried to erase entirely from existence through violence. If someone attacked my family once to eliminate this bloodline, Elena said slowly, fear creeping into her voice, would they not try again if they learned I survived? The question hung heavily in the air, and neither Damon nor Edith offered immediate reassurance, because both understood the very real danger her survival now represented to whoever had orchestrated that attack so many years ago, and to whoever might discover the truth of her existence now. I will ensure your protection personally, Damon said finally, his voice carrying quiet determination. Whoever they were, whatever they wanted then, they will find reaching you now far more difficult than they might expect. Elena appreciated his conviction, though the fear settling into her chest refused to fully dissipate. Somewhere within the castle walls, perhaps closer than any of them realized, someone had already begun searching for exactly the kind of secret Edith had just revealed, and not everyone searching for answers intended to use them for protection. The temple stood at the highest point of Blackmore Ridge, a structure of pale stone, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, reachable only by a long staircase carved directly into the mountainside. Elena climbed the steps beside Damon early the next morning, her legs aching by the time they reached the summit, though the anxiety twisting inside her chest made the physical exhaustion feel almost insignificant by comparison. Inside the temple, incense smoke curled through shafts of colored light filtering down from stained glass windows, depicting wolves running beneath a full moon. An old woman sat cross-legged upon a raised platform at the center of the room, her eyes closed, her white hair falling loose around thin shoulders. This was the oracle, a woman named Helena, who had served the temple for longer than anyone in the kingdom could remember, said to possess sight beyond ordinary understanding. "Come closer, child," Helena said without opening her eyes, her voice raspy but clear. "I have felt your presence approaching since dawn. Elena stepped forward hesitantly, glancing back once at Damon, who nodded encouragingly. She knelt before the platform as Edith had instructed earlier that morning, and the oracle finally opened her eyes, pale and clouded with age, yet somehow seeing far more than eyes typically saw. "Show me your shoulder," Helena instructed. Elena pulled aside the collar of her dress, revealing the crescent-shaped mark that had rested quietly upon her skin, for her entire life, without ever meaning anything beyond a simple birthmark. Helena leaned forward, studying it intently, her weathered fingers hovering just above the mark without quite touching it. "The blood of Moon Hollow," Helena murmured, more to herself than to anyone else in the room. "I had begun to believe I would never witness this bloodline again before my own passing." "Elder Edith believes I am the survivor of an attack 19 years ago," Elena said quietly. "Can you confirm whether this is true?" Helena closed her eyes again, her breathing slowing, as she seemed to enter some deeper state of concentration. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the faint crackling of incense burning nearby. Finally, her eyes snapped open, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that filled the entire chamber. "You are the last living heir of the Moon Hollow line," Helena confirmed. "Born beneath a winter moon 19 years past, carried from your burning estate by loyal hands, hidden among ordinary folk who never knew the treasure they sheltered. Your survival was no accident, child. It was foreseen, though shrouded in enough uncertainty that even I could not confirm it until this very moment." Damon stepped forward, his expression intense. "The old prophecy, the one speaking of union between Alpha blood and Moon Hollow blood, does it apply here?" Helena turned her clouded eyes toward him. "The prophecy speaks of a joining, meant to occur when darkness threatens to divide our kingdoms once more. It speaks of a king who will recognize his match, not through calculation or arrangement, but through instinct alone, a wolf's recognition transcending logic entirely. Tell me, Alpha King, did you choose this woman through careful consideration of her lineage, or did something within you simply know the moment your eyes found her?" "The latter," Damon admitted. "I knew nothing of her lineage, until after I had already chosen her." "Then the prophecy moves forward as intended," Helena said, nodding slowly. "Though I must warn you both, prophecies of this nature rarely unfold without resistance. Whoever destroyed the Moon Hollow line 19 years ago did so deliberately, fearing exactly this union, fearing the restored balance it threatens to bring. If they discover Elena survived, they will not simply allow history to repeat itself without struggle." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she absorbed the weight of everything being confirmed. "Do you know who ordered the attack on my family?" Elder Edith said the official records claimed it was simply a territorial dispute. "The truth was buried deliberately," Helena said. "I have my suspicions, gathered from fragments of vision over the years, though nothing concrete enough to name names without risking grave error. What I can tell you is this: the family responsible for orchestrating that attack still holds significant influence within this kingdom today, hiding behind generations of careful reputation building designed specifically to ensure no one ever looks backward toward their true history." A cold feeling settled over Elena as she considered the implication. If the responsible family still held influence within the kingdom, it meant they likely still moved among the very court she now found herself part of, possibly disguised as allies, possibly even as people she had already met and spoken with during her short time in the castle. "Can you tell us anything more specific?" Damon pressed. "Any detail that might help identify them before they realize we are searching?" Helena closed her eyes once more, concentrating deeply for several long moments before speaking again. "I see gold, threaded through ambition. I see a family who values appearance above truth, who has spent generations perfecting the art of seeming beyond reproach, while concealing rot beneath polished surfaces. Beyond this, the vision grows unclear, obscured by whatever protective barriers they have constructed against discovery." Elena's mind immediately returned to Serafina and her father, the wealthiest family in the kingdom, obsessed with appearances, furious at being denied the crown they believed rightfully theirs. She hesitated to voice her suspicion aloud, uncertain whether jealousy over the selection ceremony was clouding her judgment, or whether genuine instinct was guiding her toward the truth. "Is there anyone within the current court who fits this description?" Damon asked, apparently following a similar line of thought. "That determination falls to you, Alpha King," Helena replied. "My sight offers guidance, not certainty. You must gather evidence carefully, patiently, without alerting whoever remains responsible that you have begun searching in their direction. Rushing forward with accusations before you possess undeniable proof will only allow them opportunity to cover their tracks more thoroughly, or worse, to act before you are prepared to stop them. Damon nodded solemnly, clearly already turning over strategies in his mind. Thank you for your guidance, Oracle. I will proceed carefully. As they prepared to leave the temple, Helena called out once more, her voice carrying an urgency that made both Elena and Damon pause at the threshold. One final warning before you depart. The bond forming between you both grows stronger with each passing day, a bond neither of you can fully control nor reverse even if you wish to. Protect this bond carefully, for it is precisely what your enemies will seek to destroy first, understanding that severing your connection weakens the very foundation the prophecy depends upon. They descended the long staircase in thoughtful silence, the weight of everything revealed inside the temple settling heavily over both of them. Elena finally spoke once they reached the bottom, her voice quiet but steady despite the uncertainty churning inside her. If Seraphina's family truly bears responsibility for what happened to my birth family, and if they discover I survived, what will they do? Damon's expression darkened. I do not know for certain, but I will not allow harm to reach you, regardless of what measures they attempt. I intend to investigate quietly, gathering whatever proof exists before confronting anyone directly. Until then, I want you surrounded by guards you trust completely, and I want you cautious around anyone connected to Duke Vale's household. That includes almost everyone at court, Elena observed grimly. Duke Vale has cultivated alliances throughout the kingdom for years. Then we proceed carefully with everyone, Damon said, until we know precisely who can be trusted. As they walked back toward the castle, Elena glanced upward toward the temple they had just left, thinking of the oracle's words, of the ancient bloodline she now carried, of the family somewhere within these walls who might have already begun suspecting the truth of her survival. Whatever peace she had briefly felt during her quiet dinner with Damon 2 nights earlier, now felt distant, replaced by a wary vigilance that would likely shadow every step she took from this point forward. Somewhere within the castle, unaware that the oracle had just confirmed everything he feared, Duke Vale sat within his private study, reading correspondence from an old contact who had spent the past 3 days investigating Elena's origins at his request. The letter in his hands revealed fragments of information about a woman traveling from the Northern Territories 19 years earlier with an infant girl. Fragments that, if pieced together carefully, might reveal far more than anyone in the castle currently realized he already suspected. His fingers tightened around the parchment as he read the final line of the letter, his expression shifting from mild curiosity into something considerably colder and more calculated. Whatever truth Elena Marsh represented, Duke Vale intended to uncover it fully before the king ever suspected he had begun looking, and he intended to use whatever he found exactly as his family had used similar knowledge once before, 19 long years in the past. A week after the visit to the temple, Damon announced a hunting ceremony to celebrate the change of season, a tradition observed by the court for generations, bringing nobles and pack members together for a day of festivities within the eastern forest bordering the castle grounds. Elena had hoped to avoid such a public gathering, still uneasy from Helena's warnings, but Damon insisted her absence would only fuel further rumors among the nobility, and so she found herself dressed in riding clothes, mounted upon a gentle mare, surrounded by dozens of nobles she barely knew. Seraphina rode near the front of the procession, dressed in deep crimson, laughing brightly, with a group of young lords who competed openly for her attention, despite her rejection at the selection ceremony. She had not spoken to Elena since their tense encounter in the garden, though Elena occasionally caught her watching from a distance, her expression unreadable behind a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. The forest stretched wide and dense around the hunting party, ancient trees creating dappled patterns of sunlight across the mossy ground below. Elena remained close to Grace, and 2 guards Damon had personally assigned to watch over her, though the festive atmosphere of the day gradually eased some of her tension, the beauty of the forest offering a welcome distraction from the anxieties weighing on her mind since the temple visit. As the hunting party split into smaller groups to pursue different trails through the woods, Elena found herself momentarily separated from Damon, who had been called aside by several council members discussing matters of territory disputes with a neighboring pack. She continued along a gentle path with Grace and her assigned guards, admiring wildflowers scattered along the forest floor, when the ground beneath her horse suddenly gave way without warning. The mare shrieked in alarm as the earth crumbled beneath its hooves, revealing a hidden pit, concealed cleverly beneath a thin layer of branches and leaves, clearly dug and disguised, well before the hunting party had ever entered these woods. Elena was thrown violently from the saddle as her horse stumbled, landing hard against the exposed roots of a nearby tree, pain exploding through her shoulder and side upon impact. Grace screamed for help as Elena's frightened horse scrambled free of the pit, bolting deeper into the forest, while the guards rushed forward to assess the damage, their faces pale with alarm. Elena struggled to sit upright, her vision swimming from the impact, aware of a sharp pain radiating through her ribs with every breath she attempted to take. Miles away, Damon suddenly stiffened mid-conversation with the council members, an overwhelming sense of alarm crashing through him, with such force that he nearly staggered where he stood. His wolf howled inside his mind, urgent and frantic, a sensation he had never experienced before, but understood instinctively as connected somehow to Elena. "Something is wrong," he said abruptly, cutting off the council member speaking to him mid-sentence. Without further explanation, he mounted his horse and rode hard through the forest, following an instinct he could not fully articulate, but trusted completely, his wolf guiding him unerringly toward the source of the distress he felt pulsing through whatever bond connected them. He found Elena minutes later, surrounded by frightened attendants and guards, sitting against the base of a tree with Grace holding pressure against a cut along her forehead. Damon leapt from his horse before it had fully stopped, rushing to kneel beside her, his hands hovering anxiously as he assessed the damage without quite knowing where he was permitted to touch. "I am fine," Elena said quickly, noting the alarm etched across his face. "Just bruised, I believe." The horse stumbled into some hidden pit along the trail. "A hidden pit," Damon repeated sharply, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward the guards. "Show me exactly where this occurred." One of the guards led him several steps away to the concealed hole, now partially collapsed from the mare's escape, revealing sharpened stakes buried at the bottom, hidden deliberately beneath the deceptive covering of branches and leaves. Damon's expression turned to stone as he studied the trap, understanding immediately that no natural formation could account for such a precisely constructed hazard, positioned directly along a trail the hunting party would predictably travel. "This was no accident," Damon said grimly, returning to Elena's side. "Someone constructed this trap deliberately, and someone with knowledge of our planned route ensured it was placed exactly where we would encounter it." Elena felt a cold chill despite the warmth of the afternoon sun filtering through the canopy above. "Who would have known which trail we would take?" "Very few people," Damon replied, his jaw tight with barely restrained anger. "The hunting master planned the routes only yesterday evening, shared only among select attendants responsible for preparing today's ceremony." Grace, still pressing a cloth against Elena's forehead, spoke up hesitantly. "Your Majesty, forgive my boldness, but Lady Seraphina requested a detailed map of today's planned trails from the hunting master, just yesterday morning, claiming she wished to select the most scenic route for her own riding party." Damon's expression hardened further at this information. "Bring the hunting master to me immediately. I want to know exactly who requested information about today's trails, and I want a full accounting of anyone who had opportunity to construct such a trap before dawn this morning." As guards departed to fulfill his command, Damon turned his full attention back to Elena, gently examining the bruising forming along her shoulder and the shallow cut across her forehead. His hands trembled slightly as he assessed her injuries, the earlier surge of panic still coursing through his system, even as relief settled that her injuries appeared far less severe than they might have been. "You could have been killed," he said quietly, his voice rough with an emotion Elena had not heard from him before. "If your horse had fallen differently, if you had landed even slightly to the left where those stakes waited." "But I did not," Elena said gently, reaching up to touch his hand where it rested near her shoulder. "I am here, and I am safe." "For now," Damon replied grimly, "but this confirms exactly what Helena warned us about. Someone within this court already knows enough to consider you a threat worth eliminating, and they are willing to act rather than simply wait and watch." Elena's mind returned immediately to her tense conversation with Seraphina in the garden days earlier. The veiled threats disguised as polite conversation, the cold certainty in her voice suggesting positions gained through fortunate accidents rarely lasted long. "Do you believe Seraphina orchestrated this herself?" Or could someone else within her family be responsible? I do not yet know for certain, Damon admitted, though the timing of her request for trail information is difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence. I intend to question her directly, though I suspect she will claim innocence regardless of her true involvement. As if summoned by the mere mention of her name, Serafina appeared at the edge of the clearing, her expression carefully arranged into concerned surprise as she took in the scene before her, Elena injured and surrounded by guards. Damon, kneeling protectively beside her, with barely concealed fury etched across his features. "What has happened here?" Serafina asked, her voice pitched perfectly to convey genuine alarm. "I heard shouting and feared the worst." Damon rose slowly to face her, his pale eyes studying her expression with an intensity that made even Serafina's practiced composure waver slightly. "Someone constructed a hidden trap along the trail Elena's party traveled today, a trap that required advanced knowledge of our planned routes." "How terrible," Serafina said, pressing a hand to her chest in apparent distress. "I do hope she is not seriously injured." "I understand you requested detailed trail information from the hunting master yesterday," Damon continued, his voice carrying an edge that made several nearby nobles fall silent, straining to listen despite pretending otherwise. Serafina's composure flickered, just barely, before she recovered smoothly. "I did request such information, Your Majesty, though only to select an appropriately scenic path for my own riding party this afternoon. Surely you do not suspect I would endanger anyone through such reckless means." "I suspect nothing yet," Damon said carefully, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I am simply gathering facts. I trust you will make yourself available should the guards require further questioning regarding your request." "Of course, Your Majesty," Serafina replied, her smile tight and controlled. "I have nothing to hide." As she departed with her attendants trailing behind her, Elena watched the exchange with growing unease, uncertain whether Serafina's composed denial reflected genuine innocence or simply skilled deception, perfected over years of court politics. Either way, the message delivered by today's near disaster remained unmistakably clear. Someone within these castle walls wanted her removed permanently, and they possessed both the knowledge and the willingness to act on that desire, regardless of consequences. The quiet peace Elena had briefly allowed herself to imagine, settling into her new life within the royal wing, now felt further away than ever, replaced instead by the constant, exhausting awareness that danger might be waiting behind even the most innocent-seeming smile. In the days following the hunting ceremony, Damon assigned his most trusted investigator, a quiet man named Nathaniel who had served the royal family for over a decade, to look into Serafina's household discreetly. Nathaniel moved carefully through the castle, questioning servants and stable hands without revealing the true purpose behind his inquiries, gathering small fragments of information that gradually began forming a troubling picture. Meanwhile, Elena spent her recovering days confined largely to her quarters, her bruises healing slowly, while guards maintained a constant watch outside her door. Damon visited each evening, sharing updates from Nathaniel's investigation, though little concrete evidence had yet emerged connecting Serafina directly to the hidden trap. "Elder Edith wishes to speak with us again," Damon informed Elena one evening, entering her chamber with an expression suggesting the news carried weight. "She says she has recovered additional fragments of memory regarding the night of the attack on your birth family, details she believes may help identify those responsible." Elena rose immediately, eager for any information that might clarify the mystery surrounding her past. They met Edith in the same private study where the initial revelation had occurred weeks earlier, the elderly woman looking paler than before, as though the weight of dredging up old memories had taken a physical toll on her health. "I have spent many sleepless nights attempting to recall details I buried deliberately after that terrible night," Edith began, her voice trembling slightly. "I was young, frightened, focused entirely on ensuring the infant in my arms survived the chaos surrounding us. But certain images have resurfaced. Images I believe carry significance." "What have you remembered?" Damon asked gently. "Before the attack began, I recall seeing a banner among the assembled forces," Edith said slowly. "A golden banner bearing the emblem of a hawk clutching an olive branch, an emblem I did not recognize then, being unfamiliar with the various noble houses throughout the kingdom at that time." Damon's expression shifted immediately to alarm. "That emblem belongs to House Vale. Duke Vale's family has carried that exact symbol for generations." Elena felt the room tilt slightly around her. Serafina's family orchestrated the attack on my birth family? It would appear so, Edith said grimly. Though I must stress, this memory alone does not constitute definitive proof. Banners can be stolen, borrowed, or planted deliberately to misdirect suspicion. However, combined with everything else we have observed, the pattern grows increasingly difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Damon paced the length of his study, his mind clearly working through the implications. If House Vale orchestrated the attack 19 years ago specifically to eliminate the Moon Hollow bloodline, fearing the prophecy Helena described, then Elena's survival represents everything they fought to prevent. Discovering she lives, and that I have chosen her as my intended mate, would be catastrophic for their long-term ambitions. Which explains why Serafina requested the trail information so soon after the selection ceremony, Elena said slowly, pieces falling into place within her own mind. If her family already suspected something about my identity, or feared what my presence near the throne might eventually reveal, eliminating me quickly would seem the most efficient solution. We still lack concrete proof, Damon cautioned. Suspicion and circumstantial connection are not sufficient grounds to accuse one of the most powerful families in the kingdom without risking significant political upheaval, particularly if we are wrong. Then how do we proceed? Elena asked. Damon considered the question carefully before answering. Nathaniel continues his investigation into Serafina's recent activities. Perhaps we should also investigate Duke Vale's older history more directly, searching for any records connecting his family to events 19 years ago that might corroborate Edith's memory of the hawk emblem. I may be able to assist with that, Edith offered. The temple archives contain records from that era, though many have been deliberately damaged or removed over the years. Whatever remains might still yield useful information if examined carefully. Over the following days, Edith and Damon worked together sifting through fragile documents within the temple archives, while Nathaniel continued his careful surveillance of Serafina's household. Elena, growing restless from confinement, insisted on participating in the investigation herself, spending hours alongside Edith, poring over faded records and correspondence from decades past. It was Elena who eventually discovered the crucial piece of evidence, buried within a collection of old shipping manifests, documenting supplies transported to and from various noble estates during the winter of the attack. Among the mundane records of grain and cloth, one entry stood out. A shipment of unusually large quantities of weapons transported from House Vale's estate to the Northern Territories just 3 days before the recorded attack on the Moon Hollow family occurred. This proves nothing definitively, Edith cautioned when Elena showed her the discovery. But combined with everything else, it paints an increasingly clear picture. Damon examined the manifest carefully, his expression grim. Weapons transported specifically toward the region where the Moon Hollow estate was located, timed precisely before the attack. This is significant evidence, though we will need more before making any public accusation. As their investigation continued gathering momentum, unbeknownst to them, Serafina had grown increasingly suspicious of the quiet inquiries circulating through the castle, sensing that something was shifting beneath the surface of normal court activity. She confronted her father directly one evening, within the privacy of their family estate, her earlier confidence noticeably shaken. "Father, guards have been asking strange questions among the servants," Serafina said urgently. "Questions about my whereabouts the morning before the hunting ceremony, about my interactions with the hunting master. Someone suspects my involvement in what happened to the maid." Duke Vale's expression remained carefully neutral, though something calculating flickered behind his eyes. "You assured me the trap would appear as nothing more than unfortunate misfortune. If suspicion has fallen upon you, perhaps your execution of the plan lacked the subtlety I expected. This is not the time for blame," Serafina snapped, fear edging into her voice. "If they discover the truth about who she really is, about what our family did 19 years ago, we will both face consequences far beyond simple embarrassment at court." Duke Vale's jaw tightened at the mention of the past. The girl's survival was meant to be impossible. If she truly carries Moon Hollow blood as we suspect, then eliminating her before the king fully understands what she represents remains our only viable option, regardless of the risks involved. "And if we fail again?" Serafina asked quietly. "Then we will face judgment for actions taken 19 years ago, to protect the stability of this kingdom from prophecies that threaten to upend everything our family has built across generations," Duke Vale replied coldly. "I did not orchestrate that attack out of malice, Serafina. I did it because unchecked, that bloodline threatened to shift power away from families like ours entirely, returning authority to ancient lines we had spent generations working to surpass. Serafina absorbed her father's words with growing unease, understanding fully now the depth of what her family had done, and the danger they now faced should the truth surface publicly. Whatever loyalty she felt toward her father's ambitions, the reality of their situation settled over her with increasing weight, a realization that the scheme she had participated in extended far beyond simple court rivalry into something considerably darker and more dangerous than she had initially understood. Nathaniel arrived at Damon's study late one evening carrying a leather satchel filled with documents he had gathered over the past week, his expression carrying the quiet satisfaction of a man who had finally uncovered what he sought. Elena sat beside Damon as Nathaniel spread the contents across the desk, revealing correspondence between Duke Vale and several minor lords from the Northern Territories, dated to the exact winter of the attack, 19 years earlier. These letters discuss coordination of forces along the northern border, Nathaniel explained, pointing to specific passages within the aging documents. While carefully worded to avoid explicit admission, the timing and content strongly suggest Duke Vale organized and funded the assault against the Moon Hollow estate personally, using mercenary forces disguised as rival pack members to obscure his family's direct involvement. Damon read through the letters carefully, his expression darkening with each passing line. This is damning evidence, though still circumstantial, regarding direct proof of his personal involvement in the attack itself. However, combined with Edith's memory of the Hawk Banner and the weapons manifest Elena discovered, I believe we now possess sufficient grounds to bring formal accusations before the full council. What happens once accusations are made? Elena asked, uncertain of the formal processes governing such serious charges within the kingdom's justice system. Duke Vale will be summoned before the full council to answer these charges directly, Damon explained. Given the severity of the accusations, involving the near extinction of an entire noble bloodline, the consequences if proven guilty would be severe, likely resulting in the complete dissolution of House Vale's standing within the kingdom, along with appropriate punishment for those directly responsible. And if he denies everything, claims the evidence is fabricated or misinterpreted, Elena pressed. Then the council will weigh the evidence carefully before rendering judgment, Damon replied. I do not intend to rush this process recklessly. Whatever judgment emerges must withstand scrutiny, both from the council and from history itself. Before further discussion could continue, urgent knocking interrupted them, and a guard entered looking distinctly alarmed. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but there has been an incident within the eastern wing. Lady Serafina was discovered attempting to access the temple archives late this evening, apparently searching for and attempting to destroy certain historical records. Damon rose immediately, exchanging a grim glance with Elena and Nathaniel. Bring her to the throne room immediately. It appears our investigation has not gone unnoticed after all. They found Serafina already surrounded by guards within the grand hall, her composure entirely shattered, tears streaking through carefully applied makeup as she realized the futility of further denial. Duke Vale arrived shortly afterward, summoned urgently from his estate, his expression carefully controlled despite the evident panic simmering beneath his composed exterior. Your Majesty, Duke Vale began, attempting to salvage the situation through practiced diplomatic charm. I am certain whatever misunderstanding has occurred here can be resolved through calm discussion between reasonable parties. There is no misunderstanding, Damon replied coldly, gesturing for Nathaniel to present the gathered evidence before the assembled council members who had hastily convened upon hearing of the commotion. We possess documented correspondence, physical evidence of weapons shipments, and eyewitness testimony connecting your family directly to the attack on the Moon Hollow estate, 19 years ago, an attack that nearly succeeded in permanently eliminating an entire bloodline. Duke Vale's carefully maintained composure finally cracked as the full weight of the evidence was laid before the council, murmurs of shock rippling through the gathered nobles as they absorbed the implications of what they were witnessing. Serafina, standing beside her father, seemed to shrink beneath the weight of accusatory stares now directed toward their family. Whatever occurred 19 years ago was done to protect the stability of this kingdom, Duke Vale said finally, apparently recognizing that outright denial would prove futile against such overwhelming evidence. The Moon Hollow bloodline represented a dangerous shift in power, a threat to the established order that generations of noble families had worked to build. I acted to preserve stability, nothing more. You acted to preserve your own family's ambitions, Damon replied sharply, at the cost of innocent lives, including an infant who survived only through fortunate circumstances beyond your control. And when that survivor reappeared within these very walls, rather than accepting the will of prophecy and fate, you attempted murder once again, orchestrating a trap designed to eliminate her before her true identity could be confirmed. The council chamber fell into stunned silence as Damon's words settled over the assembled nobles. Elena stood quietly beside him, watching the scene unfold with a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow, understanding finally the full truth behind the tragedy that had shaped her entire life without her ever knowing it. What proof exists connecting my daughter to the recent attempt against Elena Marsh? Duke Vale demanded, apparently attempting one final defense on Serafina's behalf. Nathaniel stepped forward, presenting additional evidence he had gathered. Servants within the Vale household confirmed Lady Serafina requested detailed maps of the hunting trails the evening before the ceremony, and stable hands reported witnessing her departing the estate grounds late that same night, returning only shortly before dawn, consistent with the time frame required to construct the hidden trap discovered along the trail. Serafina's composure finally broke entirely under the weight of this direct evidence. I only wanted to protect my family's position, she said, tears streaming freely now. My father convinced me the Maid's survival threatened everything we had built. I did not fully understand the gravity of what I was participating in until it was already done. Damon studied her tearful confession with something approaching pity, though his voice remained firm as he addressed the full council. Regardless of intention or manipulation by others, attempted murder against the crown's chosen mate constitutes serious crime, deserving serious consequence. I leave judgment regarding appropriate punishment to this council's careful deliberation, though I expect swift and decisive resolution given the severity of these confirmed crimes. As guards moved to escort both Duke Vale and Serafina toward secure holding chambers, pending formal judgment, Elena felt Damon's hand find hers, steady and reassuring amid the chaos surrounding them. The truth she had sought since first learning of her hidden heritage had finally emerged fully into the light, revealing both the tragedy of her past and the treachery that had continued threatening her present, even within these very castle walls she now called home. It is over, Damon said quietly, though something in his tone suggested he understood this was merely one chapter concluding, rather than the entire story reaching its final resolution. Whatever comes next, you no longer need to fear hidden enemies moving unseen against you. Elena nodded, though relief mixed uneasily with the lingering weight of everything she had learned about her family's tragic history. As the council chamber slowly emptied, she found herself staring at the empty space where Duke Vale and Serafina had stood only moments before, wondering what judgment awaited them, and wondering, too, what her own future now held, having finally uncovered the truth of exactly who she truly was. 3 days passed before the arrangements for visiting the oracle were finalized, and in that time, Damon insisted the kingdom needed to see life continuing as normal, lest the whispers of scandal grow into something more dangerous. A hunting ceremony had long been scheduled to mark the beginning of the autumn season, an event attended by every noble house, and canceling it now would only fuel rumors that something was deeply wrong within the castle. Elena did not want to attend. The idea of standing among the same nobles who had laughed at her during the selection, now forced to watch her ride beside the king as though she belonged there, filled her with a dread she could not fully explain. But Damon insisted her presence would send an important message, that hiding away would only embolden those who wished to see her removed. You will not be riding alone, he promised. Callum will be near you at all times, and I will never be far. The morning of the hunt dawned crisp and golden, the kind of autumn light that made the forest beyond the castle glow amber and red. Nobles gathered in the courtyard dressed in fine riding clothes, their horses groomed and restless, eager for the open trails. Elena had been given a gentle mare, calm enough for a rider unaccustomed to the saddle, though she still gripped the reins with white knuckles as the party set out through the castle gates. Serafina rode near the front of the procession, dressed in deep emerald green, laughing lightly at something one of her companions had said, though her eyes flicked toward Elena more than once, with an expression that made the hair on the back of Elena's neck rise. The trail wound through dense woodland, the hunting party splitting gradually into smaller groups as the terrain narrowed. Elena rode carefully near the rear, Callum close beside her, his eyes scanning the trees with the sharp focus of someone who trusted nothing about this ceremony, despite its outward appearance of harmless tradition. "Something feels wrong," Callum murmured, more to himself than to her. "What do you mean?" Elena asked, glancing around at the peaceful forest, golden leaves drifting lazily from the branches overhead. "I don't know yet," Callum admitted. "Call it instinct. Stay close to me." They continued along the trail for another quarter hour, before the path split, one route leading toward an open meadow, where the main hunting party had gathered, the other curving deeper into thicker woods rarely used during these ceremonies. Elena's mare, usually calm and steady, suddenly grew skittish, tossing her head and stamping nervously despite the gentle terrain. "Easy, easy," Elena murmured, trying to calm the animal, though her own unease was growing to match the horse's. A sharp crack echoed from somewhere in the thicker woods, followed immediately by a chorus of frightened shouts from further up the trail. Callum's expression hardened instantly. "Stay here," he ordered, though even as he said it, Elena's mare bolted, spooked beyond control by whatever had caused the noise, carrying her deep into the tangled undergrowth before Elena could do anything but cling desperately to the saddle. Branches whipped past her face as the terrified mare crashed through the forest, ignoring every attempt Elena made to slow her down. She caught glimpses of movement in the trees around them, shapes too quick and too deliberate to be ordinary woodland animals, and her heart pounded with the growing certainty that whatever had spooked her horse had not been an accident. The mare finally stumbled to a halt near a narrow ravine, sides heaving, and Elena slid from the saddle on shaking legs, gripping a nearby tree trunk for support. The forest around her had gone eerily quiet, the birdsong and rustling leaves replaced by a heavy, watchful silence that made every instinct in her body scream danger. A figure emerged from the tree line ahead, dressed in dark hunting leathers, face partially obscured by a hood. Elena's breath caught, her body freezing in place, as the figure moved closer, deliberate and unhurried, as though the outcome of this encounter had already been decided. "You shouldn't have wandered so far from the group," the figure said, voice low and unfamiliar. "Accidents happen so easily in these woods." Elena's mind raced, searching desperately for any escape route, any way to buy herself time. "Who sent you?" she demanded, forcing steel into her voice, despite the fear clawing at her chest. The figure did not answer, instead reaching for something concealed beneath the hunting cloak, and Elena's body reacted before her mind fully processed the danger, scrambling backward along the edge of the ravine, putting distance between herself and the approaching threat. A sudden, powerful howl split the air, deep and furious, echoing through the trees with enough force that birds exploded from the branches in every direction. The hooded figure froze, clearly recognizing the sound, before turning and disappearing back into the thick undergrowth with startling speed. Moments later, a massive gray wolf burst through the tree line, golden eyes blazing with a fury Elena had never witnessed before, muscles rippling beneath thick fur as it skidded to a stop in front of her, positioning its body protectively between her and the direction the hooded figure had fled.
"Damon?"
Elena breathed, recognizing those eyes, despite the transformed body surrounding them. The wolf did not shift back immediately, instead scanning the trees around them with sharp, alert focus, ensuring the threat had truly retreated, before finally allowing its powerful form to ripple and shrink, familiar human features emerging from beneath fur and muscle, until Damon knelt before her, breathing hard, his expression a mixture of relief and barely controlled rage. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, hands moving over her shoulders, checking for injury with an urgency that betrayed exactly how frightened he had been. "I'm fine," Elena managed, though her entire body trembled from the encounter. Someone was here. They said something about accidents happening easily in these woods. Damon's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking beneath his skin. "I felt your fear the moment your horse bolted. I've never run that fast in my life." Callum arrived moments later, breathless from the pursuit, several other guards trailing behind him. His eyes swept the scene, taking in Elena's disheveled state, the frightened mare standing nearby, and Damon's still tense posture. "We lost the trail near the eastern ridge," Callum reported grimly. Whoever it was knew these woods well enough to disappear completely. "Find out who was absent from the main hunting party during the last half hour," Damon ordered, his voice cold with barely restrained anger. I want names, and I want them cross-referenced against every noble house in attendance today." Elena sat quietly on a fallen log while the guards organized their search, her thoughts racing back to Serafina's cold smile at the start of the ride, to the warning she had delivered days earlier in the garden. She could not prove anything, not yet, but the timing felt too deliberate to dismiss as mere coincidence. When the search parties eventually returned with no further trace of the attacker, the hunting ceremony was quietly cancelled. Nobles ushered back toward the castle, under heavier guard than had been present at the start of the day. Elena rode back beside Damon in tense silence, her mind replaying the encounter over and over, searching for details she might have missed. "This confirms it," Damon said finally, once they were alone in the privacy of his study, the castle settling into uneasy evening quiet around them. "Someone wants you gone badly enough to risk an attack in broad daylight, surrounded by half the noble houses in the kingdom. That is not the action of someone merely jealous over a lost selection." "You think it was House Vane," Elena said quietly. "I think it is too dangerous to assume otherwise, and too dangerous to accuse them without proof strong enough to withstand the political fallout that would follow," Damon replied. "Until we have that proof, your safety comes first, above all other considerations." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, staring into the low fire crackling in the hearth. "I keep thinking about what Callum said, about the border wars, about a bloodline nearly wiped out generations ago. If that's true, if House Vane really did something like that once before, then what happened today wasn't just an attack on me, it was the same fight starting all over again." Damon's expression darkened with quiet resolve. "Then we will make certain it ends differently this time." Outside the study window, the last golden light of the autumn afternoon faded into deep blue evening, and somewhere across the kingdom, in a manor draped with emerald banners, careful and calculating eyes watched the castle from a distance, already planning the next move in a game that had begun long before Elena Marsh had ever stepped foot inside the selection hall. The journey to the Oracle's forest began at first light, 5 days after the failed attack during the hunting ceremony. Damon insisted on riding alongside Elena himself this time, accompanied by Callum and a dozen additional guards, leaving no room for another ambush along the winding forest trails. The deeper they traveled into the ancient woodland, the stranger the forest became. Trees grew taller and more twisted than anything found near the castle, their bark pale silver rather than brown, their leaves shimmering faintly, even without direct sunlight. The air itself seemed to hum with quiet energy, and Elena found herself glancing over her shoulder more than once, certain she felt unseen eyes watching from the shadows between the ancient trunks. "The Oracle has lived in this forest longer than anyone can remember," Damon explained as they rode. "Some say she was already old when my grandfather's grandfather ruled these lands. She rarely leaves her grove, and she rarely grants audiences unless the matter concerns something significant enough to warrant her attention." "And you believe my situation qualifies?" Elena asked. "I believe if anyone can confirm or deny what Callum suspects about the moon-blessed bloodline, it is her," Damon said. "I sent word 3 days ago, requesting this audience. She agreed almost immediately, which is rare enough on its own to tell me something important." They reached the edge of the Oracle's grove by midday, the guards remaining behind at Damon's instruction, while he and Elena continued alone on foot along a narrow path lined with softly glowing moss. The grove itself opened into a wide clearing centered around an enormous silver tree, its branches stretching impossibly high, roots spreading across the ground like veins beneath pale earth. A woman sat near the base of the great tree, ancient beyond guessing, her hair long and white as moonlight, her eyes a shade of violet so pale they seemed almost translucent. She did not rise as they approached, simply watched them with an expression of calm, patient curiosity. "Alpha King Damon Cross," the Oracle said, her voice carrying an echo that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond the clearing itself. "And the one you have brought with you. Come closer, child. Let me look upon you properly." Elena approached carefully, feeling the weight of the Oracle's gaze settle over her like a physical presence. The ancient woman studied her for a long, silent moment, her violet eyes tracing every detail of Elena's face, before finally focusing on the faint crescent mark visible at the edge of her collar. "So it is true," the Oracle murmured. "After all these years, the bloodline has returned." Damon stepped forward. "Then Callum was right. She carries the moon blessing. She carries far more than a simple mark. the oracle said, rising slowly to her feet, her movements graceful, despite her evident age. Sit, both of you. This is not a truth easily spoken standing. They settled onto smooth stones arranged near the base of the great tree, and the oracle closed her eyes for a long moment, as though gathering threads of memory stretched thin across centuries. Long before the kingdoms as they exist today were carved from these lands, she began, the wolf packs lived without kings or thrones, guided instead by bloodlines, chosen by the moon itself to maintain balance between the packs. The strongest bloodline among them was called the Moon-Blessed, gifted with an ability to sense discord before it erupted into open conflict, to guide alphas toward decisions that protected the many, rather than serving the ambitions of the few. The oracle's expression grew somber. As kingdoms formed and power consolidated beneath single rulers, some among the ambitious houses grew resentful of a bloodline whose influence could not be inherited through conquest or politics, only recognized through a bond neither side could control. One house in particular grew determined to eliminate the threat entirely, believing that removing the Moon-Blessed would clear their own path toward greater power. House Vane, Damon said grimly. The oracle inclined her head slightly. Though they carried a different name in those distant days, yes. The conflict that followed nearly destroyed both bloodlines entirely, remembered now only as the Border Wars, a chapter of history most kingdoms prefer to forget rather than examine closely. The Moon-Blessed were believed extinguished entirely, their line ended, their gift lost to history. But it wasn't ended, Elena said slowly, understanding dawning, even as the oracle continued. No, the oracle agreed. A single infant survived, hidden and protected by loyal servants, who refused to let the bloodline die. That infant's descendants continued in secret for generations, hidden from a world that believed them long extinct, passing the mark and the gift quietly from mother to daughter, without ever revealing their true heritage, even to themselves. Elena's breath caught. My mother knew. She had to have known, or at least suspected something, if she spent her entire life hiding from her past. Perhaps she knew fragments, the oracle said gently. Perhaps she knew only enough to understand that safety required silence. Fear has a way of burying truth deep enough that even those closest to it forget the shape of what they are protecting. Damon leaned forward, his expression intense. If House Vane discovers the truth, if they realize Elena represents the return of a bloodline they once tried to destroy entirely, what will they do? The oracle's violet eyes darkened. They will do whatever proves necessary to ensure the bloodline does not survive a second time. The attack in the woods was not the desperate act of a jealous rival. It was the calculated first move of a house that has waited generations for this threat to reappear, and now that it has, they will not hesitate to finish what their ancestors began. Elena felt cold, despite the warm afternoon light filtering through the silver leaves above them. Why me? Why does any of this matter now, after everything survived in hiding for so long? The oracle studied her carefully before answering. Because bloodlines such as yours do not simply survive by accident, child. They return when the world requires balance most desperately. The old texts speak of a reckoning, a moment when the Moon-Blessed and the strongest alpha of their generation would stand together once more, not merely as mates, but as the beginning of restoring what was broken so many generations ago. A prophecy, Damon said quietly. Call it what you wish, the oracle replied. Prophecy, destiny, simple pattern repeating across centuries. Whatever name you give it, the truth remains the same. Your bond was never a matter of chance, Alpha King. Your wolf recognized in her precisely what the old texts always promised it would, the moment the bloodline returned to walk among the packs once more. Elena sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb the weight of everything she had just learned. A mother who had spent her entire life running from a war she barely understood herself. A bloodline nearly destroyed generations before her birth. A destiny apparently written long before either she or Damon had drawn their first breath, waiting patiently through centuries of silence for this exact moment to finally arrive. What do I do with this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to be whatever the old stories expect me to become. The oracle reached out, resting a weathered hand gently over Elena's own. You do not need to become anything you are not already, child. The gift does not require you to transform into someone new. It requires only that you learn to trust what already lives within you. Patience, honesty, the ability to see clearly what others overlook. These qualities brought you safely through 19 years of hiding. They will carry you through whatever challenges remain ahead. And House Vane? Damon asked. What do we do about the danger they represent? The oracle's expression grew serious once more. You must be careful, Alpha King. A house that has waited generations for this moment will not act carelessly. Watch closely, and trust few beyond those already proven loyal. The battle ahead will not be won through swords alone, but through uncovering truths that House Vane has spent generations working to bury. As the afternoon light began to shift toward evening gold, the oracle rose slowly, signaling the audience had reached its natural end. Return to your castle, both of you. The path ahead will not be easy, but the bond between you is stronger than the schemes arrayed against it, so long as you both choose to trust it fully. They rode back toward the castle in contemplative silence, the weight of everything revealed settling heavily over both of them. Elena stared out at the passing forest, her mind turning over every detail the oracle had shared, piecing together fragments of her mother's careful silence, understanding finally why a woman who had once carried an ancient legacy had chosen instead to disappear quietly into an ordinary life, hoping desperately that her daughter might never need to face the danger she herself had fled. But destiny, it seemed, was rarely so easily outrun, and as the castle towers finally came into view against the darkening evening sky, Elena understood with growing certainty that whatever quiet, hidden life her mother had once hoped to protect her from, she now stood squarely within its path, with no way forward except directly through whatever trials awaited on the other side. News of House Vale's downfall spread through the kingdom within days, carried by messengers to every corner of Blackmore Ridge and beyond, into neighboring territories, where allied pacts took careful note of how swiftly and decisively King Damon had handled the betrayal within his own court. Duke Vale awaited formal judgment within a secure chamber of the castle, stripped of his title and his household's holdings pending the council's final decision, while Serafina remained separately confined, her fate still undetermined given her partial cooperation once confronted with undeniable evidence. Elena found herself unable to fully celebrate the resolution, her thoughts instead drifting frequently toward the family she had never known, the parents whose faces she could not recall, whose voices existed only as absence within her memory. One quiet afternoon, she asked Edith to accompany her back to the temple archives, hoping to learn whatever additional details remained about the Moonhollow family, beyond the tragic circumstances of their destruction. Tell me about them, Elena asked softly, seated across from Edith within the dim archive room, surrounded by shelves of ancient scrolls and yellowed parchment. My parents, what were they like? Edith's expression softened with old memory, as she considered the question. Your mother, Lady Miriam Moonhollow, possessed a gentle spirit that belied the strength of her bloodline. She was known throughout the Northern Territories for her kindness toward common folk, often visiting villages personally to ensure fair treatment under her family's rule. Your father, Lord Aldrich, served as an accomplished diplomat, respected even among rival pacts for his fairness and honesty in negotiations. Did they know I existed before the attack? Elena asked, her voice trembling slightly. They knew, Edith confirmed gently. You were born only 3 months before that terrible night, a source of tremendous joy within their household. I remember your mother's face when she first held you, radiant with a happiness that seemed to light the entire room around her. Tears gathered in Elena's eyes as she absorbed these fragments of a life she had never known, a family whose love for her had existed even before she could form memories of her own. Why did they attack that particular night? What triggered it? I believe word had somehow reached Duke Vale's predecessors regarding your birth, Edith said thoughtfully. Perhaps a spy within the Moonhollow household, perhaps intercepted correspondence celebrating your arrival. Whatever the source, it seems your birth confirmed fears that had circulated among certain ambitious families for generations, fears that the ancient bloodline capable of fulfilling old prophecies might finally produce an heir capable of shifting the balance of power away from those who had spent generations accumulating influence through other means. Elena absorbed this information slowly, understanding now that her very existence had been considered dangerous enough to warrant the destruction of an entire noble house. The weight of such history settled heavily upon her shoulders, though beneath the sorrow, something else began forming, a quiet resolve to honor the family she had never known, by embracing fully whatever role destiny now asked of her. Later that evening, Damon found her still within the archive room, staring at an old portrait Edith had located among the preserved records, a painted likeness of Lady Miriam and Lord Aldrich standing together before their northern estate, their faces kind and warm, despite the formal stiffness typical of noble portraiture from that era. "They look happy," Elena observed quietly, as Damon settled beside her. "They were fortunate to have found each other," Damon said gently, studying the portrait alongside her. "Much as I consider myself fortunate to have found you, however unconventional the circumstances of our meeting." Elena managed a small smile despite the heaviness still lingering within her chest. "I keep wondering what my life would have looked like if that attack had never happened. Would I have grown up within the northern estate, trained as heir to my family's legacy, prepared from childhood for exactly the kind of union the prophecy describes?" "Perhaps," Damon acknowledged, "though I find myself grateful for the woman you became, regardless of the circumstances that shaped you. Your kindness, your humility, your genuine warmth toward everyone you meet. These qualities exist within you, not despite your difficult upbringing, but perhaps partly because of it. I do not believe a version of you raised amid noble privilege would necessarily possess the same depth of character I have come to admire." Elena appreciated his words, though the loss of the family she never had a chance to know still ached within her heart. "I wish I could have known them, even briefly. I wish I could remember my mother's voice, my father's laugh, anything beyond fragments other people recall on my behalf." "Perhaps you carry more of them within you than you realize," Damon offered. "Edith mentioned your mother's kindness toward common folk. I have watched you extend that same kindness toward everyone within this castle, regardless of their station, since the very day I first met you. Perhaps some essence of who they were lives on through you, even without conscious memory to draw upon." The following morning, formal council proceedings concluded regarding the fate of House Vale, with judgment rendered that stripped the family entirely of noble status, their extensive lands and holdings redistributed among loyal families who had served the crown faithfully for generations. Duke Vale himself was sentenced to permanent exile from the kingdom, forbidden from ever returning to Blackmore Ridge or its surrounding territories, under threat of severe punishment. Seraphina's fate proved more complicated, given her partial cooperation and apparent manipulation by her father throughout her involvement in both the original scheme and the more recent attempt against Elena. The council ultimately decided upon a lengthy period of supervised service within a remote northern outpost, an opportunity for genuine reflection and reformation rather than permanent exile, though her noble title was similarly revoked as part of her family's broader punishment. Before her departure, Seraphina requested a private audience with Elena, a request Damon initially hesitated to grant given the history between them, though Elena insisted on hearing whatever Seraphina wished to say. They met within a small chamber, guards positioned discreetly nearby, Seraphina looking considerably diminished from the confident, elegant woman who had once competed so fiercely for the throne. "I know my words mean little, given everything I have done," Seraphina began, her voice quiet and stripped of its former haughty confidence. "But I wanted you to know that I understand now the depth of wrong I participated in, both the original crime against your family and my own recent actions against you directly. I allowed my father's ambitions and my own wounded pride to convince me that eliminating you served some greater purpose, when in truth, I was simply protecting privilege I had done nothing to earn beyond fortunate birth." Elena studied her former rival carefully, searching for genuine remorse beneath the words. "What will you do now, once you begin your service in the north?" "I do not know," Seraphina admitted honestly. "I have spent my entire life being told my worth depended entirely on status and appearance. I suppose I will need to discover who I am, without either of those things propping me up." "I hope you find that person to be someone worth knowing," Elena said sincerely, surprising herself with the genuine warmth behind her words, despite everything Seraphina had done. "Holding on to anger toward you will not undo what happened to my family, nor will it heal whatever wounds led you toward the choices you made. I would rather see you use this opportunity to become someone better than continue carrying the weight of who you once were." Seraphina seemed genuinely moved by Elena's response, tears gathering in her eyes as she absorbed a kindness she clearly had not expected to receive. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I did not deserve such generosity, but I am grateful for it nonetheless." As Serafina departed the castle later that day, escorted by guards toward her new posting in the north, Elena watched from a window overlooking the courtyard, feeling a strange mixture of closure and lingering sorrow. The chapter involving House Vale's betrayal had finally concluded, though the deeper wounds left by her family's tragic history would likely require considerably longer to fully heal. That evening, Damon found her still standing at the window, watching the last light of sunset paint the courtyard in shades of orange and gold. He wrapped his arms gently around her from behind, resting his chin against the top of her head as they watched the day fade together in comfortable silence. "How are you feeling, truly?" he asked softly. "Uncertain," Elena admitted. "Relieved that the immediate danger has passed, grateful for justice served regarding my family's tragedy, yet still processing everything I have learned about who I truly am and where I came from. It is a great deal to absorb within such a short span of time." "You do not need to process it all at once," Damon reminded her gently. "We have time now. Time to grieve properly for the family you lost. Time to learn more about your heritage at whatever pace feels right to you. Time to simply exist together, without the shadow of immediate threat hanging over every moment." Elena turned within his embrace to face him directly, studying his features in the fading evening light, still somewhat amazed that this man, powerful enough to command an entire kingdom, chose to hold her with such gentle care, despite everything that had unfolded since their first meeting. "Thank you for believing in me from the very beginning, even before either of us understood why your wolf responded to me the way it did. I only wish I had trusted that instinct more fully from the start," Damon replied, "sparing you some of the danger and uncertainty that followed our initial meeting. But I do not regret the choice itself, not for a single moment. You are precisely who I was always meant to find, regardless of the complications surrounding how we found each other." As night fully settled over Blackmore Ridge, the castle finally quiet after weeks of turmoil and revelation, Elena allowed herself to simply rest within the safety of Damon's presence, grateful for the peace that had finally arrived, however hard-won, and however much uncertainty likely still remained ahead, regarding her new role within a kingdom that had once laughed at her very presence within its walls. In the weeks that followed the resolution of House Vale's betrayal, Elena found herself gradually settling into a rhythm within castle life that felt less foreign with each passing day. The nobles who had once openly mocked her now regarded her with a wary respect, understanding fully now the truth behind Damon's unconventional choice at the selection ceremony, though genuine warmth from the court remained something she suspected would take considerably longer to earn than mere acknowledgement of her legitimate claim to her new position. Elder Edith continued working alongside Elena regularly, helping her learn more about Moon Hollow traditions and history that had been nearly lost following the destruction of her birth family's estate. Elena discovered small customs her mother had apparently followed, gentle rituals connecting the Moon Hollow bloodline to the changing phases of the moon, traditions that felt both foreign and somehow deeply familiar as she learned to practice them herself. "Your mother used to light a candle during each full moon," Edith explained one evening as they sat together within Elena's private chamber. "A small tradition meant to honor the ancient connection between your bloodline and lunar cycles. Would you like to begin observing it yourself?" Elena nodded, moved by the idea of connecting with her lost heritage through such simple, tangible practice. That night, as the full moon rose high above Blackmore Ridge, Elena lit a single candle upon her windowsill, watching its flame flicker gently as she whispered a quiet prayer for the family she had never truly known, feeling somehow closer to them through this small act of remembrance than she had through any amount of historical documentation Edith had shared with her. Damon joined her during this quiet ritual, standing silently beside her as she completed the small ceremony, understanding instinctively that this moment required his presence without words, simple companionship, offered without interruption, to her private grief and gradual healing. Afterward, they sat together near the window, discussing plans for the future that had begun taking shape amid the chaos of recent weeks. "The council has been discussing our formal union," Damon mentioned carefully, watching her reaction. "Given everything that has been confirmed regarding your heritage and the ancient prophecy connecting our bloodlines, they believe a proper royal wedding should take place relatively soon, both to formalize our bond officially and to demonstrate stability to neighboring kingdoms who have taken keen interest in recent events here." Elena felt a flutter of nervous anticipation at the mention of marriage, though beneath the nervousness lay genuine happiness at the prospect of formally joining her life with Damon's, a joining that felt increasingly natural despite the extraordinary circumstances that had first brought them together. What does a royal wedding typically involve? Considerable ceremony, Damon admitted with a small smile. Representatives from allied pacts throughout the region, formal blessing from the temple oracle, traditional exchanges of vows beneath the full moon, according to ancient custom. It would be, admittedly, a rather grand affair, quite different from the quiet dinners we have grown accustomed to sharing. I confess the idea of such a large ceremony makes me somewhat anxious, Elena admitted honestly, particularly given how poorly my last major appearance before the assembled court concluded. Damon chuckled softly at her wry observation. This time, however, everyone attending will understand precisely why I chose you, rather than viewing the choice as some inexplicable mystery worthy of ridicule. I suspect the reception you receive will differ considerably from your first experience within that hall. Over the following weeks, preparations for the royal wedding gradually took shape throughout the castle, seamstresses working carefully on Elena's ceremonial gown, kitchen staff planning elaborate feasts to celebrate the occasion, temple attendants preparing the sacred grounds where the ceremony would take place beneath the open night sky. Elena found herself increasingly involved in these preparations, offering suggestions drawn from her own experience working within castle kitchens, insisting on incorporating recipes and traditions she had learned during her years as a maid, alongside more formal royal customs. You do not need to concern yourself with such details, one of the wedding coordinators mentioned gently one afternoon, clearly surprised by Elena's hands-on involvement in planning menus and decorations. Such matters are typically handled entirely by staff. I understand, Elena replied warmly, but I spent years working within these very kitchens, learning recipes and traditions I hold genuine affection for. I would like our celebration to honor both aspects of who I am, the ordinary maid I once was, and the heritage I have only recently discovered. Both feel equally important to my identity. The coordinator seemed genuinely moved by this sentiment, and word gradually spread throughout the castle staff regarding Elena's continued warmth and humility, despite her elevated position, earning her considerable goodwill among servants who had initially felt uncertain about her sudden rise from among their own ranks. As the wedding date approached, representatives from neighboring pacts began arriving at Blackmore Ridge, curious to witness firsthand the union that had generated such fascinating rumors throughout the region. Elena met numerous foreign dignitaries during formal receptions leading up to the ceremony, gradually growing more comfortable navigating the complex political dynamics of royal diplomacy, drawing upon lessons Damon patiently taught her during quiet evenings together. One particular guest, an elderly alpha from a distant western territory named Frederick, approached Elena during one such reception with evident curiosity. I have heard remarkable things about your story, young lady. Tell me, how does it feel discovering such an extraordinary heritage after believing yourself simply an ordinary maid for so many years? Elena considered the question thoughtfully before answering. It feels rather like discovering a second story hidden beneath the one I always believed to be my entire life, one that adds depth and context to who I am, without erasing the years I spent believing myself simply ordinary. I do not think either version of my story feels more true than the other. Both shaped me into the person standing before you now. Frederick nodded approvingly at her response. A wise perspective, particularly for someone so young. I suspect you will serve this kingdom well, precisely because you understand the value of humility, even amid extraordinary circumstances. As the night before the wedding finally arrived, Elena found herself unable to sleep, too filled with anticipation and lingering nervousness to settle into rest, despite the exhaustion of weeks filled with preparation and diplomatic obligations. She wandered quietly through the castle gardens beneath a sky brilliant with stars, seeking a moment of peaceful solitude before the following day's grand ceremony would forever change her life once again. She found Damon there as well, apparently sharing similar restlessness, standing near the same rose garden, where she had once encountered Seraphina's veiled threats so many weeks earlier. He smiled warmly upon seeing her approach, extending his hand as she drew near. Nervous? He asked gently. Considerably, Elena admitted with a small laugh. Though grateful nervousness, if such a thing exists. I keep thinking back to that first day, standing in the selection line entirely by accident, certain I was about to be humiliated and dismissed. I never could have imagined this is where that accidental moment would eventually lead. Neither could I, Damon admitted, though I find myself profoundly grateful for whatever force guided you into that hall precisely when it did. Whatever destiny or fate or simple chance brought us together, I intend to spend the rest of my life ensuring you never regret the path it set us upon. Elena leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder as they stood together beneath the star-filled sky, feeling more certain than ever that whatever challenges still lay ahead, she would face them from a place of genuine partnership and love, rather than the isolation and uncertainty that had once defined her entire existence within these castle walls. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, autumn sunlight filtering gently through the temple's stained glass windows, as Elena stood before a tall mirror, studying her reflection, while Grace and Margaret made final adjustments to her ceremonial gown. The dress had been crafted specifically to honor both aspects of her identity: simple ivory fabric reminiscent of humble beginnings, adorned with delicate silver embroidery, depicting crescent moons along the sleeves and hem, a subtle nod toward her moon hollow heritage. "You look radiant," Margaret said warmly, adjusting a small circlet of silver and pearls, resting atop Elena's carefully arranged hair. "I still cannot quite believe this is truly happening," Elena admitted, studying her reflection, with a mixture of wonder and lingering disbelief. "It feels like such a distance from where I began, carrying water jugs through castle corridors, just a few short months ago." "Destiny has a way of finding those meant to fulfill it," Grace observed gently, regardless of how unlikely the path toward that fulfillment might initially appear. As the appointed hour approached, Elena made her way toward the temple grounds where the ceremony would take place, accompanied by Edith, who had insisted on personally escorting her given her role in Elena's discovery weeks earlier. The temple courtyard had been transformed for the occasion, adorned with countless flowers and flickering lanterns, benches arranged to accommodate the numerous dignitaries and pack representatives who had traveled considerable distances to witness this historic union. Damon waited at the front of the gathered assembly, dressed in formal ceremonial attire befitting his position, his pale eyes finding Elena immediately as she began walking down the flower-lined path toward him. The expression on his face, filled with unmistakable love and quiet wonder, settled any remaining nervousness Elena carried, replacing it instead with growing certainty that whatever came next, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The Oracle Helena presided over the ceremony, her ancient voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd, as she spoke words connecting this union to the ancient prophecy that had guided events since Damon's initial selection weeks earlier. "Tonight, beneath the light of the full moon, we witness the fulfillment of prophecy long awaited by our people, the joining of alpha blood with the last heir of Moon Hollow lineage, a union meant to restore balance and strength to our kingdoms during times of uncertainty." As Helena continued speaking, guiding them through traditional vows exchanged according to ancient custom, Elena felt the weight and beauty of the moment settling over her, understanding fully now the significance of everything that had unfolded since that chaotic day when she had accidentally wandered into the selection line, dressed in a plain gray maid's uniform, never imagining the extraordinary destiny awaiting her. "Do you, Damon Cross, Alpha King of Blackmore Ridge, accept this union, recognizing in Elena Marsh your true and fated mate, blessed by ancient prophecy, and confirmed through the undeniable bond your wolf recognized from your very first meeting?" Helena asked. "I do," Damon replied, his voice steady and filled with genuine conviction that carried clearly across the silent courtyard. "And do you, Elena Marsh, last surviving heir of the Moon Hollow bloodline, accept this union, embracing both the destiny your heritage demands and the genuine love that has grown between you and this Alpha King since your unexpected meeting?" "I do," Elena answered, her voice carrying more confidence than she believed herself capable of, just months earlier, standing terrified before this very court, certain she was about to be humiliated beyond recovery. As Helena pronounced their union complete, the assembled crowd erupted into celebration, cheers and applause echoing across the temple grounds, as Damon leaned down to seal their vows with a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of everything they had endured together to reach this moment. Elena felt tears of genuine joy gathering in her eyes as the reality of everything finally settled fully within her heart. The celebration continued long into the evening, feasting and dancing filling the castle's great hall, The very same hall where Elena had once been mocked and ridiculed for daring to stand among noble daughters competing for the crown. Now she moved through that same space as Luna, formerly recognized ruler beside her Alpha King, greeted with genuine warmth by nobles who had once dismissed her entirely. Frederick, the elderly Alpha from the Western Territories, approached her during the celebration, raising his glass in a warm toast. To the Luna who proved that true worth cannot be measured by birth or title alone, but rather by the strength of character carried within. Elena accepted the toast graciously, grateful for the acceptance she had worked so hard to earn since that chaotic first day. Throughout the evening, she found herself repeatedly drawn back to memories of her humble beginnings, the kitchen work she had once considered her entire existence, the mother who had raised her in quiet secrecy, without ever revealing the extraordinary heritage hidden beneath their simple life. Late that night, once the celebration had finally wound down and most guests had retired to their quarters, Elena and Damon stood together upon a balcony overlooking the castle grounds, the full moon casting silver light across the peaceful landscape below. Elena thought of her birth parents, of the tragedy that had shaped her early life without her knowledge, of Edith's brave sacrifice, carrying her to safety through that terrible winter night 19 years earlier. "I wish they could have seen this," Elena said softly, gazing up at the bright moon above them. "My parents, I mean. I wish they could have witnessed what became of the daughter they lost so tragically." Damon wrapped his arm gently around her shoulders, following her gaze upward toward the luminous moon. "Perhaps, in whatever way such things work, they are watching even now, proud of the woman their daughter became, despite everything that tried to prevent her from reaching this moment." Elena leaned into his embrace, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over her that she had not known was possible, following everything she had endured since that fateful day of the selection ceremony. The journey from mocked kitchen maid to celebrated Luna had been filled with danger, revelation, and heartbreak. Yet standing here now beside the man she loved, having finally learned and honored the truth of her hidden heritage, Elena understood fully that every difficult step along that unexpected path had led her precisely toward the destiny she was always meant to fulfill. The kingdom of Blackmore Ridge, once divided by the ancient betrayal that had nearly erased an entire bloodline from existence, now stood unified beneath a king and queen whose bond had proven strong enough to overcome deception, danger, and doubt alike. As the moon continued its steady journey across the night sky above them, Elena finally allowed herself to simply exist within this hard-won happiness, grateful beyond words for the extraordinary destiny that had found her, precisely when she least expected it, transforming an ordinary maid into the queen her lost family had always hoped she would become. Back at the castle, Damon ordered a deeper search into the sealed records, this time with the Oracle's confirmation giving Edwin and the other advisors full authority to pursue answers without fear of overstepping their bounds. What they eventually uncovered painted a picture darker and more deliberate than anyone had anticipated. 19 years earlier, Elena's mother, Rosalind, had lived not in the quiet village where Elena grew up, but within a small packed settlement near the eastern border, one of several communities that had long maintained uneasy peace alongside House Vane's territory. Rosalind had been recognized, even then, as carrying the old mark, though she herself had been raised believing it nothing more than a family birthmark passed down through generations, much as Elena had believed the same about her own. An elder within Rosalind's settlement, a woman who had studied the old texts extensively, recognized the truth of what the mark represented, and warned Rosalind quietly that House Vane's scouts had been seen surveying the border settlements with unusual frequency. Fearing for her unborn child, Rosalind fled during the night, disappearing entirely from the Eastern Territories. Weeks later, the eastern border settlements were struck by what official records described as a sudden and unexplained sickness sweeping through the community, killing dozens within a single terrible fortnight. Only after Callum cross-referenced medical records preserved from that period did a disturbing pattern emerge. Every family confirmed to carry even a trace of the old bloodline had perished in that outbreak, while neighboring families without any connection to the moon-blessed lineage remained entirely untouched. "It wasn't sickness," Callum said grimly, presenting his findings to Damon and Elena in the privacy of the study. "Or if it was sickness deliberately introduced, targeted with precision no natural outbreak could ever achieve." Elena felt sick reading through the old reports, imagining her mother fleeing through the darkness with an unborn child, narrowly escaping a fate that had claimed every other family who shared her hidden heritage. My mother lost everyone, her whole community, simply because they carried the same mark I carry. And King Cross, your father, Callum continued carefully, addressing Damon, appears to have learned of the incident sometime afterward. Whether he suspected the truth of what had happened, or simply recognized the danger surrounding anyone connected to that bloodline, he issued the seal on Rosalind's records personally, ensuring no trace of her survival, or yours, would ever surface in official documentation. He was trying to protect us, Elena said quietly, understanding dawning with painful clarity. Even without fully knowing why, he was trying to keep whatever happened at that border settlement from ever reaching us again. Damon's expression had grown increasingly hard throughout Callum's explanation, a controlled fury simmering just beneath his composed exterior. If House Vane orchestrated the deaths of an entire settlement, simply to eliminate a threat to their ambitions, then what happened in the woods during the hunting ceremony was not an isolated act of desperation. It was a continuation of a plan they have pursued patiently for nearly 2 decades. We still have no direct proof connecting House Vane to either incident, Callum cautioned. Circumstantial evidence, timing, motive, all of it points strongly in their direction, but without a confession or undeniable documentation, moving against them publicly risks tearing the kingdom apart in a conflict we cannot easily control. Then we find proof, Damon said firmly, quietly, carefully, but relentlessly, until we have enough to bring this before the full council, without doubt remaining. Over the following days, Elena found herself drawn increasingly into these investigations, no longer content to remain a passive observer of her own unfolding fate. She spent hours in the archives alongside Callum, poring over old records, cross-referencing names and dates, searching for any thread that might lead them closer to undeniable proof. It was during one such evening, deep in the archive's oldest section, that Elena discovered something neither Callum nor the advisors had yet uncovered. Tucked within a ledger of servant employment records dating back nearly 20 years, she found a name she recognized immediately, a woman named Constance, listed as having served briefly within the eastern border settlement before transferring to work within House Vane's own manor staff, precisely 3 months before the deadly outbreak struck. Callum, Elena said, her voice tight with excitement and dread combined. Look at this. Callum examined the ledger carefully, his eyes widening, as he made the same connection Elena had already drawn. A servant transferred directly from the settlement to House Vane's staff, shortly before the outbreak began. If she carried something into that community deliberately, disguised as an ordinary servant's belongings or supplies, we need to find her, Elena said. If she's still alive, if she still serves within House Vane's household, she might know exactly what happened. Locating Constance proved more difficult than either of them anticipated. House Vane's manor kept meticulous records of current staff, but historical employment beyond a certain point had conveniently gone missing, much like Elena's own sealed birth records had nearly vanished entirely from official documentation. It took nearly a week of careful, discreet inquiry, through trusted contacts within the servant network, people who remembered names and faces even when official paperwork failed to preserve them, before they finally traced Constance to a small cottage near the southern edge of the kingdom, where she had retired several years earlier. Damon insisted on accompanying Elena and Callum himself when they finally rode out to speak with the retired servant, unwilling to risk Elena's safety on a journey that might easily be another trap laid by House Vane's considerable influence. They arrived at the modest cottage as afternoon shadows lengthened across the quiet countryside, and an elderly woman answered the door, her expression turning pale and fearful the moment she recognized the king's presence on her doorstep. "Your Majesty," she stammered, dropping into an unsteady curtsy. "I never expected such an honor." "We need to speak with you about your time serving within the eastern border settlement," Damon said gently, though his tone left no room for refusal. "And what you may know about what happened there 19 years ago." Constance's face drained further of color, her hands trembling visibly as she stepped aside to allow them entry. Once seated within her small, humble kitchen, she stared at the worn wooden table for a long moment, before finally speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wondered, every single day for 19 years, whether anyone would ever come asking that question," she said. "I have carried this guilt so long I feared I would die with it still buried inside me. Tell us everything, Elena said gently, recognizing in the woman's trembling hands and haunted eyes the weight of a secret that had clearly tormented her for nearly 2 decades. Constance took a shaking breath before beginning her account, and as her words spilled out, slow and painful, confirming every suspicion Callum's research had uncovered, Elena felt the final pieces of her mother's desperate flight, and the terrible price paid by an entire community, finally settling into place, transforming vague historical suspicion into undeniable, damning truth. "I was young then," Constance began, her voice trembling. "House Vane offered me a position within their manor kitchens, a considerable improvement over my modest work in the border settlement. I did not question the timing, not until much later, when I understood exactly what I had unknowingly carried with me." "What do you mean?" Elena asked softly, though dread already coiled tightly in her stomach. "Before I left the settlement, a steward from House Vane visited me privately, offering me a small parcel to deliver to the settlement's shared well, claiming it was a blessing intended to bring good fortune to my former community, as a farewell gesture." Constance's hands twisted together on the table. I believed him. I had no reason not to. Within weeks of my departure, the sickness began. I did not learn until years later, from careless words, spoken by a House Vane steward during a private gathering, that the parcel had contained no blessing at all, but something poisoned, designed specifically to target those carrying a particular bloodline mark. "You didn't know what you were carrying," Damon said, his voice gentler than Elena expected, recognizing the crushing guilt weighing on the elderly woman before them. "I should have questioned it," Constance whispered. "I was young, and grateful for the opportunity, and I did not think to ask why a wealthy noble house would concern itself with the fortune of a modest border settlement. By the time I understood the truth, it was far too late to undo what had already happened." "Did you ever hear the name of the steward who gave you the parcel?" Callum asked carefully. Constance nodded slowly. "His name was Aldrich. He served House Vane loyally for many years afterward, rising eventually to oversee much of their household affairs. If he still lives, he would know far more than I do about who ordered such a terrible act, and why." Callum exchanged a grim look with Damon. "Aldrich still serves House Vane. He oversees their private estate records to this day." "Then we have our next step," Damon said, rising from the table. He turned back to Constance, his expression softening. "You will not face consequences for what happened. You were deceived, used without your knowledge or consent. I would ask only that you remain willing to testify, should this matter eventually require it, before the full council." Relief flooded across the elderly woman's tired face, tears spilling freely now that nearly 2 decades of guilt finally found somewhere safe to land. "I will testify to whatever truth I know, Your Majesty. I only wish I had understood sooner what I carried, before so many innocent lives were lost." They left the cottage as evening settled fully across the countryside, riding back toward the castle, with Constance's confession weighing heavily over their conversation. The path forward seemed clearer now, though no less dangerous. Confronting Aldrich directly risked alerting House Vane, before sufficient proof could be gathered to withstand the political consequences of accusing one of the kingdom's most powerful families. Damon devised a careful plan over the following days, working closely with Edwin and Vivian to arrange a quiet, official inspection of House Vane's estate records, framed as a routine audit required of all noble houses following recent unrest along the eastern border, providing cover to examine Aldrich's records without raising immediate suspicion. The audit proceeded smoothly for the first 2 days, revealing nothing beyond ordinary estate business. On the 3rd day, however, Callum discovered a hidden ledger tucked within a false compartment beneath Aldrich's private desk, detailing decades of correspondence between House Vane and various operatives tasked with monitoring and, when necessary, eliminating any trace of the surviving moon-blessed bloodline. The ledger named Rosalind directly, tracking her movements in the months following her flight from the border settlement, though the trail curiously went cold shortly after Elena's birth, suggesting Rosalind had succeeded in disappearing completely before House Vane's operatives could locate her final hiding place. More damning still, the ledger contained recent entries, dated just weeks before the selection ceremony, documenting Serafina's own awareness of a possible moon-blessed survivor, rumored to be living quietly somewhere within the kingdom, along with explicit instructions to eliminate the threat immediately should she ever be identified. "This confirms everything," Damon said grimly. examining the recovered ledger within the privacy of his study that evening. Serafina knew, or at least suspected, the truth about you before the selection ceremony ever began. Her family's entire strategy has been built around ensuring the moon-blessed line never resurfaces to challenge their influence. What happens now? Elena asked, though she already suspected the answer would not be simple. Now we bring this evidence before the full council, Damon said. Aldrich's ledger, Constance's testimony, the pattern of deaths at the border settlement, all of it together forms proof strong enough to withstand even House Vane's considerable influence. But we must move carefully. The moment they realize we possess this evidence, they will act, likely with whatever violence they believe necessary to prevent exposure. Callum, who had remained largely silent throughout the discussion, finally spoke. Your Majesty, I recommend increasing security around Elena immediately, and considering the possibility of confronting House Vane before they have opportunity to act first, rather than waiting for the full council to convene through its usual lengthy process. Damon nodded slowly, weighing the risks carefully. Arrange increased guards throughout the castle tonight. Tomorrow, I will call an emergency council session. If Serafina and her family believe their scheme remains hidden, we may yet have the advantage of surprise on our side. That night, as Elena lay awake in her chamber, turning over everything they had uncovered, a soft knock interrupted her restless thoughts. She opened the door, to find Damon standing there, his expression troubled, despite his earlier confidence before the council. I couldn't sleep either, he admitted quietly. Come in, Elena said, stepping aside. He entered, settling into a chair near the dying fire, and for a long moment neither spoke, simply absorbing the quiet comfort of shared company, after a day heavy with revelation and danger. I keep thinking about your mother, Damon said finally. Everything she survived, everything she sacrificed to keep you safe, only for the same danger to eventually find you, regardless of how carefully she hid. She gave me 19 years of ordinary life, Elena said softly. 19 years without fear, without danger, without any of this weight pressing down on me. I think, given the chance to choose again, she would still make the same choice, even knowing it could only delay the inevitable, rather than prevent it entirely. Are you afraid of what comes next? Damon asked. Elena considered the question honestly before answering. I am. But I'm no longer only afraid. I'm angry too. Angry that an entire community died, simply because they carried a mark passed down through generations. Angry that a family has spent decades planning to erase mine entirely, rather than risk facing whatever balance the old stories claim we were meant to restore. I don't want to hide anymore, the way my mother had to. I want to finish what she started when she chose to run, rather than let herself, and me, be silenced entirely. Something shifted in Damon's expression, admiration mixing with quiet relief. Then we will finish it together, whatever tomorrow's council session brings. Outside, beyond the castle walls, the night stretched long and dark toward an uncertain dawn, and within a distant manor draped in emerald banners, Serafina paced her private chambers restlessly, unaware that the careful web her family had spun across 2 decades of silence was finally, irrevocably, beginning to unravel. The emergency council session convened the following morning, in the great hall itself, rather than the smaller chamber usually reserved for such matters, Damon deliberately choosing the location to ensure every noble house present would witness whatever unfolded. Word had spread quickly overnight that something significant was about to occur, and by the time the session began, the hall stood packed with nobles, advisors, and curious onlookers, far exceeding the usual attendance for council proceedings. Elena stood beside Damon near the dais, her heart pounding, despite the calm expression she forced onto her face. She had spent the morning rehearsing what she might say, though nothing could fully prepare her for the moment when Serafina and her family entered the hall, dressed in their finest House Vane colors, entirely unaware of what awaited them. Serafina's father, Lord Aldous Vane, moved through the crowd, with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to respect and deference, his daughter walking beside him, with the same cool composure Elena remembered from the garden confrontation weeks earlier. Neither of them showed any sign of suspicion as they took their positions near the front of the assembled nobles. Damon rose from his throne, addressing the hall with a voice that carried easily to every corner of the vast chamber. Thank you all for gathering on short notice. Matters have come to my attention that require immediate and public resolution. matters concerning the safety and history of this kingdom, and the truth behind recent events that many of you have already heard whispered about. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lord Vane's expression remained composed, though Elena thought she caught the faintest flicker of tension cross his features. 19 years ago, Damon continued, an entire settlement along our eastern border perished under circumstances officially recorded as an unexplained sickness. Recent investigation has revealed this was no natural illness, but a deliberate act, targeting specifically those families known to carry an ancient bloodline mark, a bloodline believed extinct for generations, called the Moon-Blessed. The hall fell utterly silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on the king, though many glanced instinctively toward Elena, understanding immediately where this revelation was leading. We have secured testimony, Damon continued, from a witness who unknowingly carried the poison responsible for that tragedy into the settlement, delivered to her by a steward of House Vane, along with a ledger recovered from that same steward's private records, detailing decades of surveillance and planned elimination of any surviving members of the Moon-Blessed bloodline. Lord Vane's composure finally cracked, his face paling as murmurs erupted into open gasps throughout the hall. Serafina's expression shifted rapidly from confusion to dawning horror as she realized the full weight of what was being revealed. This is a fabrication, Lord Vane said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. A convenient story constructed to distract from whatever scandal surrounds the king's inappropriate choice of a common servant as his chosen. The ledger bears your steward's own handwriting, Callum said, stepping forward and presenting the recovered document for the assembled nobles to witness, along with detailed correspondence authorizing payments for information regarding the location of settlement families believed to carry the old bloodline mark. And this, Damon added, his voice hardening further, documents recent entries, dated mere weeks before the selection ceremony, in which your daughter reported suspicions of a surviving Moon-Blessed descendant living quietly within this kingdom, along with explicit instructions demanding immediate elimination of that threat, should she ever be identified. Every eye in the hall turned toward Serafina, whose face had drained entirely of color, her earlier composure shattered completely under the weight of public exposure.
I never ordered anyone harmed, Serafina said, her voice shaking despite her attempt to maintain dignity.
I only reported what my family's own historical concerns required me to report. Concerns rooted in decades of planned violence against an innocent bloodline, Damon said coldly. Concerns that led directly to an attempt on Elena's life during the recent hunting ceremony, an attack that very nearly succeeded. Gasps and furious whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire, nobles turning to one another in shocked disbelief as the full scope of House Vane's hidden campaign became clear. Lord Vane attempted several more times to deny the accusations, but each attempt crumbled further under the weight of evidence Callum and Edwin presented methodically before the assembled court. Constance's written testimony, the recovered ledger, records of Aldrich's own confession once confronted privately the previous evening, under careful, lawful questioning. As the evidence mounted beyond any reasonable denial, Lord Vane's expression finally collapsed into something resembling defeat, the weight of generations of hidden ambition finally crashing down under the unforgiving scrutiny of public exposure. Whatever my ancestors believed necessary to protect our family's standing, Lord Vane said finally, his voice hollow, I take responsibility for continuing a legacy I should have questioned rather than perpetuated. Damon's expression remained hard, unforgiving. Responsibility alone cannot restore the lives lost at that border settlement, nor undo the danger you allowed to threaten an innocent woman under my protection. House Vane's lands and titles are hereby stripped, effective immediately, pending full investigation and appropriate judgment before the royal court. Guards moved forward to escort Lord Vane and several implicated members of his household from the hall, though Serafina remained frozen in place, staring at Elena with an expression that had shifted from cold superiority into something far more complicated. Fear, mixed with something that might almost have been regret. I never truly understood what I was protecting, Serafina said quietly, her voice carrying just far enough for Elena to hear, amid the chaos surrounding them. I believed only that my family's position required certain sacrifices. I did not understand the full weight of what those sacrifices had cost, until this very moment. Elena studied her carefully, searching for sincerity beneath the words, uncertain whether to believe genuine remorse or simply desperate self-preservation, now that exposure had stripped away every advantage Serafina once held. Whatever you understood or didn't understand, Elena said finally, people died because of choices your family made. That truth doesn't change regardless of how late your regret arrives. Guards escorted Serafina from the hall alongside her father, leaving behind a chamber buzzing with stunned disbelief and rapid recalculation, as noble families throughout the kingdom began quietly reassessing alliances and loyalties in light of House Vane's dramatic and very public downfall. Damon turned to Elena once the hall had begun to empty, his expression finally softening from the cold authority he had projected throughout the proceedings. "It's done," he said quietly. "Whatever threat House Vane represented, it ends here, today, before this entire court." Elena felt the weight of nearly 3 weeks of fear, uncertainty, and danger finally beginning to lift from her shoulders, though something else remained, a quiet, unresolved question about what her own future now held, now that the shadow chasing her had finally been exposed and dismantled before an entire kingdom. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Damon reached for her hand, his golden eyes steady and warm despite the exhausting intensity of the morning's proceedings. "Now, we finally have the chance to build whatever future we choose, without the weight of hidden danger following every step we take." Around them, the great hall slowly emptied of nobles, still murmuring, in shocked disbelief, over everything they had witnessed, and for the first time since stepping unexpectedly into that same hall weeks earlier, as a frightened, humiliated servant, Elena allowed herself to feel something resembling hope, fragile but real, for whatever remarkable destiny still waited to unfold before her. 3 weeks passed following the dramatic exposure of House Vane's hidden campaign, weeks filled with careful diplomatic work as Damon and his advisors worked to restore stability across noble houses shaken by the sudden scandal. Lord Vane and Aldrich faced formal judgment before the royal court, their titles and lands redistributed among neighboring families deemed loyal and trustworthy, while Serafina, having cooperated fully with the ongoing investigation and provided information that helped locate additional hidden records, was permitted to retain a modest, unremarkable position, far removed from any political influence, a quiet fall from the heights she had once so confidently expected to claim. Elena spent those weeks continuing her education in court matters, though now with a different kind of purpose driving her efforts. Iris remarked more than once how quickly she absorbed each new lesson, how naturally she seemed to grasp the delicate balance of diplomacy and firmness required of someone destined to stand beside a ruling alpha king. What had once felt like an impossible burden gradually began to feel instead like a role she was slowly, carefully growing into, shaped by her own experiences, rather than forced upon her by circumstances beyond her control. The oracle sent word during the second week, requesting one final audience before the formal ceremony that would soon make Elena's position permanent and undeniable throughout the kingdom. Damon and Elena rode together to the Silver Grove once more, finding the ancient woman waiting patiently beneath the great tree, exactly as before. "The bloodline has been restored to its rightful place," the oracle said, studying Elena with evident satisfaction. "The threat that once nearly extinguished it entirely has been exposed and dismantled. The balance the old text spoke of finally has opportunity to take root once more." "What does that mean for the future?" Elena asked. "It means the kingdom you help shape going forward will carry within it the wisdom the moon-blessed were always meant to offer," the oracle said. "Not through mystical power or grand gestures, but through the simple, steady qualities you have already demonstrated throughout this trial: honesty, courage, and the willingness to seek truth, even when it proves dangerous or difficult to uncover." Elena felt something settle within her, a quiet confidence replacing the uncertain fear that had followed her since that first chaotic afternoon in the selection hall. She was no longer merely a maid thrust unwillingly into circumstances beyond her understanding. She had earned, through weeks of danger, investigation, and hard truths, faced directly rather than avoided, a genuine place within the destiny that had chosen her. The formal ceremony took place on a clear autumn morning, the great hall transformed with banners and flowers. Every noble house in the kingdom once again gathered to witness a moment far different from the chaotic selection weeks earlier. This time, Elena walked into the hall not as a frightened servant swept accidentally into a line of noble daughters, but as the acknowledged and celebrated moon-blessed heir, dressed in flowing silver silk that caught the morning light streaming through the tall windows. Damon stood waiting at the front of the hall, dressed in formal ceremonial attire, his expression carrying none of the guarded uncertainty from their first meeting, only open, steady warmth as he watched her approach. Margaret and Iris stood proudly among the attendants, and even Callum, usually so composed and watchful, allowed himself a rare, genuine smile as Elena passed. "The kingdom of Blackmore Ridge has witnessed much these past weeks," Damon announced, once Elena reached his side, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. "We have faced danger, uncovered painful truths buried for generations, and confronted the consequences of ambitions left unchecked for far too long. But we have also witnessed something far more powerful than any scheme built on fear or ambition. The return of a bond stretching back centuries, meant to guide this kingdom toward genuine balance and lasting peace." He turned to face Elena fully, taking both her hands in his. Elena Marsh, once dismissed as merely a maid by those who could not see past appearances, has proven herself far more than any title could ever fully capture. She carries the moon-blessed bloodline, thought lost to history, and with it, the wisdom and courage this kingdom needs now more than ever. The hall erupted not into laughter this time, but into genuine, resounding applause. Nobles who had once mocked her now watching, with expressions ranging from admiration to quiet awe. Even those who still harbored private reservations about her humble origins could not deny the undeniable truth of everything that had unfolded these past weeks, evidence too thorough and testimony too damning to dismiss as mere political convenience. "Elena Marsh," Damon continued, his voice softening as he addressed her directly now, "will you accept your place beside me, not merely as my chosen, but as Luna of Blackmore Ridge, guardian of the moon-blessed legacy, and partner in guiding this kingdom toward the balance our ancestors once fought so desperately to protect?" Elena felt tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, thinking of her mother's quiet sacrifice, of an entire settlement lost to a war she had never known existed until weeks earlier, of every moment of fear and uncertainty that had led her finally to this hall, standing not as someone lost and out of place, but as exactly who she was always meant to become. "I accept," she said, her voice steady and clear despite the emotion coursing through her. "Not because destiny demanded it of me, but because I have chosen it, freely, with full understanding of everything that choice requires." The hall roared with celebration as Damon drew her into his arms, the formal ceremony giving way to genuine, joyful chaos, as nobles and servants alike crowded forward to witness the moment their kingdom's future had irrevocably changed. Elena caught sight of familiar faces scattered throughout the crowd, former kitchen staff who had once treated her as an equal, now watching with pride rather than pity, nobles who had laughed cruelly at the selection, now bowing with genuine respect. Later that evening, after the celebrations had finally quieted and the castle settled into peaceful night, Elena stood alone on a balcony, overlooking the kingdom she now called home, watching lantern light flicker gently across rooftops and distant hills. Damon joined her quietly, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as they gazed out together at the peaceful scene below. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Elena considered the question honestly, thinking back over everything she had endured since that chaotic afternoon weeks earlier, the humiliation, the danger, the painful truth uncovered about her mother's hidden past, the courage it had taken to face each new revelation without retreating into fear. "None," she said finally. "Everyone laughed when you chose the maid. I think, given everything we've discovered, and everything we've overcome together, they understand now exactly why you did." Damon smiled, pressing a gentle kiss against her temple, as the stars slowly emerged overhead, scattered brilliant across a clear autumn sky. "Let them laugh at destiny if they wish," he said quietly. "Destiny, it seems, always finds a way of proving itself right in the end." Below them, the kingdom of Blackmore Ridge settled peacefully into night, its future now guided by a bond centuries in the making, finally restored, finally understood, and finally free, to guide the balance between packs and people toward the lasting peace the ancient bloodline had always been destined to protect.